My daughter slapped me across the face at my own dining table and shoved a stack of papers toward me. "Sign it," she said coldly. "This house should belong to me anyway." My 8-year-old granddaughter burst into tears while my son-in-law quietly locked the front door behind him. They thought an old widower living alone on $15 million of coastline would eventually break and hand everything over. So I picked up my pen, smiled, and signed exactly where they wanted. What my daughter didn't know was that the moment she forced that pen into my hand, she had already stepped into a trap 30 years in the making, built from every lesson my wife ever taught me about the difference between love and surrender. She wanted the deed to my house, and she demanded it in front of my granddaughter over breakfast. That Friday afternoon, I was out on the salt-worn deck of Osprey Bluff Estate, sitting alone, when a black Cadillac Escalade crunched up my gravel drive 3 years to the day after my wife passed, and 3 years since my daughter's voice had reached my ears. A September wind was driving whitecaps across the Atlantic. I was 60 years old, then a retired geologist who had logged 30 years charting subsurface reserves for ExxonMobil and the USGS. That kind of work teaches you to feel a tremor before anyone else does. To sense when the earth beneath your feet is about to give way. Petra climbed out first. 32 years old, my daughter dressed in a slate-gray suit that said corporate litigator without trying too hard. She had something bundled in a kitchen towel tucked under her arm, and even at 20 FT the smell reached me before she did clam chowder. "Welcome to Father's silent revenge. I'm glad you found your way here. If these stories of family loyalty and quiet justice speak to you, consider following along so you never miss one." Before we go any further, I'd love to know, is this your first time here? Or have you been walking this road with me for a while? Drop a word in the comments and let me know. One brief note before we continue: some elements of this story have been shaped for the purposes of audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. It's the truth inside the story that matters most, not just any chowder. Diane's exact Sunday recipe, the one she made every fall without fail. Yukon potatoes, apple-smoked bacon, fresh little necks, and fried shallots lifted from the oil at the precise moment between golden and overdone. 3 years she'd been gone. Ovarian cancer at 57. 3 years in which Petra had not once picked up the phone. "Dad," she called out, making her way up the deck steps. "Made your favorite, same way Mom always did." Then the passenger door burst open, and Lena Hartwell spilled out into the afternoon, 8 years old, all elbows and knees, and powdered sugar dusted across her face. She bolted over the gravel with her rag doll, the one Diane had sewn herself, swinging in her fist, and buried herself in my chest. "Oh, it's Miss Pop Pop," she hollered. "I missed you so much." Griffin Hartwell got out behind her. 35 years old. An architect with one well-regarded Charlotte building to his name, and not a single real exchange with me in all the years I'd known him. His eyes never left his phone. I kept Lena in my arms longer than I needed to. Then I looked up at my daughter. Petra wore a smile I didn't trust, calibrated, practiced, the kind that reads as warmth only if you're not watching for the seams. "Come inside," I said. 3 years of silence, and she arrives with Diane's recipe. The chowder was exactly right. We sat at the long dining table Diane and I had picked out in 1993, Lena squeezed between us, talking at full speed about second grade and a boy named Cody who ate crayons. Petra had placed candles on the table, though it was only 3:30 in the afternoon. They threw soft, uncertain light, the kind that makes it harder to read a room. Griffin contributed almost nothing. He sectioned his bread into tidy squares and glanced at his phone twice. "Hold this picture in your mind because it matters. 12 acres of Outer Banks coastline. The house worth $15 million now. Diane and I drew up the plans together in 1991, drove in the shiplap ourselves across 2 full summers. Every wall in this house remembers her hands on it. It's the only thing I've ever owned that she touched every single day we were married. Petra set her spoon down and reached into her bag. There's something I've been wanting to raise with you, Dad, she said, easing a thick manila folder across the table. A nonprofit, a lighthouse preservation foundation? They're working to restore historic coastal markers and need somewhere to stage equipment during the Cape Hatteras restoration. I took the folder. Legal documents. 40 pages, maybe more. Purely a formality, Petra went on. They need a landowner to sponsor the project. Your property is ideal proximity to Cape Hatteras direct water access. There's a modest tax benefit on your end. 30 years reading oil field contracts will do something to a man. One wrong decimal in those documents could mean $8 million gone. I learned to move through language the way I moved through rock strata, unhurried, methodical feeling for the fault. I went to page 1. The candlelight wasn't helping, so I found my reading glasses and turned the page to catch the window light. Statikas. This document is titled Deed of Gift, I said, keeping my voice even. After I sign whose name appears on the title, Petra hesitated. Half a beat. I didn't miss it. Both of ours, she said. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. It's entirely standard for arrangements like this. The foundation requires... This isn't an arrangement. I turned to page 7. It's an outright conveyance. Paragraph 7, subsection C. Mkinder. Grantor hereby conveys all right, title, and interest in the property described herein to grantee effective upon execution. The grantee named wasn't any foundation. It was Petra and Griffin. I raised my eyes. Petra's smile held, but something behind it had gone elsewhere. Lena sat coloring on a napkin, paying us no attention. Griffin had turned to stone. Dad, you're reading it wrong, Petra said with the measured calm of someone used to steering a room. The liability structure requires it to read that way. The foundation indemnifies... I'm reading it correctly. I set the page down. This transfers Osprey Bluff Estate, all 12 acres, the house, the land, to you. Outright. For nothing. I put my glasses on the table and looked at my daughter. The smile was still there barely. And I understood then that I was not looking at anyone I actually knew. Not the child who slid crayon drawings under my study door. Not the university student who rang every Sunday without fail. Not even the attorney who had simply stopped calling 3 years ago. A stranger was sitting across from me. I thought about Diane. About what she said in that hospital room 3 years ago, just 2 days before the end. Her hand in mine, the morphine drip marking time, her voice completely steady. If Petra ever finds her way back after I'm gone, if she comes asking for the house, don't hand it over. Not because she hasn't earned it. Because chasing it will be the thing that breaks her. I folded the document and pushed it back across the table. No, I said. Petra's expression went flat. Her palms pressed down onto the table, and for 3 seconds the room held nothing but the sound of wind working at the windows from the ocean side. You don't understand what I'm telling you, she said, her voice pulled tight. I am drowning in debt, Dad. Drowning. You're living on top of $15 million of coastline that just sits here. I'm here every day, I said. This is where I live. Alone, she shot back. Rattling around in a house that was built for a whole family, a family that's gone. Mom is dead. My life is in Charlotte now. Lena needs a real foundation, good schools, stability, a future, and you're prepared to let this property follow you into the ground. I set the folder to the side and kept my voice where it was. This is a deed of gift for the entire Osprey Bluff estate. You are lying to me, Petra. What followed happened in very little time. Petra's right hand swung across the table and struck the left side of my face. hard enough that my reading glasses left my face entirely and rang off the wooden floor. The sound had a finality to it, sharp like a gavel coming down. Lena cried out. I stayed where I was, completely still, cheek-stinging, watching my daughter. Her breathing was ragged, her color high, her eyes wide, but not with regret. With something colder than that. She was calculating. Working out the next sentence, the framing, the way to make the fault land on me. Lena was weeping now, arms wrapped around her doll voice, small and repeating, "Mommy, Mommy, stop!" Over and over. Griffin pushed back his chair and got to his feet. He didn't so much as glance in my direction. He moved to the front door, and I heard the deadbolt drive home, then the chain drawn across. Then he squared himself against it, arms folded, a human lock on the only exit. "Hi, you're not going anywhere," Petra said, her finger leveled at me, her voice still trembling. "Not until you've signed." I lowered myself slowly and retrieved my reading glasses from the floor. The left lens had taken a hairline crack, but the glasses still held. I wiped them on my shirt, settled them back in place, and regarded my daughter. 32 years, and I had never seen her so clearly. "Lena," I said quietly, not moving my eyes from Petra. "I need you to go upstairs to the guest room, the one with the blue curtains. Close the door behind you." Lena stood frozen, face wet, unable to move. "Go on, sweetheart," I said softer. She went. Her feet were loud on the stairs, and then a door shut. Petra settled back into her chair. Griffin kept the door. The three of us remained in silence. It felt long, though it was probably only 47 seconds. I counted. "Do you imagine that locking me in my own home settles anything?" I asked. "What I think," Petra said, "is that you're an old man alone on a cliff with nobody nearby who'd hear you if you called out. I think you'll stay in that chair until you understand this is going to happen, regardless of whether you make it easy. And I think you're too smart to choose the hard way." I offered nothing back. Petra stood, pushed her chair in, and climbed the stairs. Griffin went after her without speaking. Their door closed. Through the ceiling I could hear the low, urgent current of Petra's voice, angry, insistent. But the words wouldn't resolve. I sat alone at the table while the candles guttered and the room darkened. After a time I got up, went to the kitchen, and stayed there in the dark with no particular thought in my head. Then the memory came. Spring of 2018, 6 months before Diane died. Outer Banks Hospital, 3 days in, and every morning I had made the drive to sit beside her. On the 3rd day, she asked me to shut the door. She asked me to check that Petra wasn't standing in the hall. Then she slid an envelope out from beneath her pillow. "I had Clifton put this together," she said. "Clifton, our estate attorney, someone we'd trusted for 20 years. It's a codicil to my will. Rate it. 2 paragraphs. Plain language. Osprey Bluff Estate would pass to Petra on her 35th birthday, then 3 years off under a single condition. She had to come home once a month and cook a family dinner with me. 12 dinners a year, 3 years running. 36 in all." "Why?" I asked. "Because I know Petra," Diane said. Her voice carried exhaustion, but the words came out crisp. "I've known this child since she was 4 years old, hoarding candy in her pockets rather than passing it around. What she wants is things Warren, not people. And a daughter who can't be bothered to sit at her father's table 36 times across 3 years hasn't earned the right to this property." "You're judging her too harshly," I said. Diane fixed me with the look she reserved for moments when I was choosing blindness over reason. "You have always loved her more than I have," she said. "I understand that, a father and his daughter. But there's one thing I need from you. The land transfers to her at 35 on the condition she comes home for dinner once every month. If she can't manage that, it passes into a trust for Lena. No wiggle room. Swear to me." I swore. Now here I was, seated in the unlit kitchen, One lens cracked in my glasses, Petra somewhere above me making plans I couldn't see. I ran the numbers. Petra was 32 in 2021. She'd turn 35 in November of 2024, 3 years from now. 36 dinners, 1 per month. The path had been right there. She could have come through the door, ladled out a bowl of Diane's clam chowder, pulled up a chair, and told me anything at all about her life. 3 years down that road, and the property would have been hers to keep, clean title, no deception, no bolted locks. A good father and a wise father are not always the same man. I was a good father. I am not sure I was a wise one. There in the dark, I was tallying 36 dinners when she reappeared from upstairs, the manila folder in hand. What surprised me was how unsurprised I felt, because the answer to what came next had already formed itself. The answer required 3 things: the fountain pen Diane had pressed into my hand in 1996, a geological security technique I'd field-tested in West Texas oil country, and enough patience to let Petra walk away, believing she'd gotten what she came for. I held off until 11 that night. Lena had drifted off on the living room sofa, arms wrapped around her rag doll. Griffin sat scrolling his phone in silence. Petra moved back and forth across the kitchen floor, heels striking the tile in that measured cadence she falls into when she's doing arithmetic in her head. I pushed back from the dining table. "I'll sign it," I said. Petra went still. She turned, and I caught it, the flash of victory crossing her face before she could pull it back. "You're making the right choice, Dad," she said, pushing the manila folder across to me. I retrieved the fountain pen from my breast pocket. A Waterman hemisphere, deep blue with silver trim attached to a thin chain connecting to Diane's keepsake necklace. She had given it to me the day I put my signature on my first major exploration contract in 1996, engraved with the words, "For the man who finds what others miss." What Diane had no way of knowing was that the cartridge I'd loaded in 2001 held something other than ordinary ink. It was a specialized geological security compound. We relied on it for field authentication, proprietary signatures, chain of custody documents requiring verification without permanent archiving. The compound bonded to paper fibers for 4 to 6 hours, then dissolved entirely on contact with sunlight or oxidation, leaving 0 chemical trace behind. It was engineered to vanish. I eased off the cap, allowed my hand a slight tremor, and wrote out my full name, Warren Dale Caldwell. The ink landed dark blue-black on the page, sharp and sure. Petra seized the document before the ink could set. "Finally," she said, tilting it toward the candlelight. A smile spread across her face. "See, that wasn't so hard." She crossed to the front door. The deadbolt turned, then the chain rattled free. "You can sleep in your own bed tonight, Dad. We'll have this filed first thing Monday." Griffin fell in behind her. The car engine turned over tires, chewing gravel, and then the night went quiet. I remained standing and let a thin smile find me. Diane had put that pen in my hands 25 years back while I was surveying reserves that would go on to yield 40 million barrels of oil. It never would have occurred to her that 2.5 decades on it would serve as the opening move in a campaign to defend everything she'd cherished. I lifted Lena off the sofa and carried her to the guest room, settling her beneath the blue quilt Diane had stitched, then went to my own bed and slept more soundly than I had in 3 days. The phone woke me at 10:00 the following morning. I was out on the beach when it buzzed Petra's name across the screen. I counted 4 rings before answering. "What did you do to that paper?" Pitched high and ragged, her voice barely holding. "I signed it," I told her, keeping my tone level. "I have no idea what you mean." "The signature is gone, not faded, gone. The notary called me 10 minutes ago. There's nothing there, just bare paper where your name should be." I quit walking and turned my eyes toward the water. Long, easy swells were moving in off the Atlantic. How odd, I said. The pen may have been running low. Old ink behaves that way sometimes. Stop toying with me, she hissed. I am coming back, and you are going to put your name on this the right way. I'm not at the house, I said. Out for a walk. She cut the line. I stayed put on the sand, thinking, then pulled up my contacts and landed on the number I'd been moving toward all morning. Conrad Farwell. I hit dial. He picked up on the second ring. Warren, he said, genuine warmth, a note of surprise. It's been a while. How are you getting through all this? Conrad Farwell was 62. A retired Monteo police chief, the kind of man whose laugh filled a room, but whose eyes never stopped cataloging details. We'd been friends since 1987 when a call about a break-in at my house turned into a 3-hour conversation over Diane's clam chowder. Nobody I'd ever known read criminal behavior the way he did. Conrad, I said, skipping past the small talk. I have to tell you about Petra. The ease left his voice at once. I heard a chair scrape a door pulled shut. Go on, he said. So I went on. Every piece of it, the folder, the deed of gift, the slap, the locked door, Lena's crying, the ink that was no longer there. I laid it out without editorializing. Conrad didn't speak for 5 full seconds after I finished. Warren, he said, and the register had dropped entirely nothing of the old friend left in it. She will be back, and she won't arrive the same way twice. What changes? Paperwork is finished for her. The legitimate channel hadn't delivered, so she'd be moving to something else. She'd be leaning on your health, your age, the fact that you're out there on your own. Are you asking me to step in? I kept my gaze on the water, a fishing boat tracing the edge of the horizon. Get in, I said. Right. Nothing else gets signed. The door stays shut to her, and you begin writing everything down, dates, times, exact words. If she makes a move to have you declared incompetent or a danger to yourself, that record is what protects you. She's already decided I'm a confused old man, I said. Good, then we let her keep thinking that, Conrad said. Allow her to believe she has the advantage. Meanwhile, we construct the case, and every step she takes buries her a little further. For the first time in 3 days, I felt something shift in the weight of all this, not lifting off me but transferring onto her. Thank you, I said. Hold off on that, Conrad replied. We're just at the beginning. She'll be coming from directions you haven't mapped yet. That's the nature of someone with their back against the wall. I ended the call and didn't move for a while, watching the surf. What Conrad had given me over the phone wasn't a friend's reassurance. It was the cool, practiced assessment of someone who'd watched predators miscalculate and already knew which corner to back her into. She's going to use you, he'd said. Standing there at the edge of the Atlantic, I understood I wasn't dealing with a desperate daughter grasping at a shortcut. This was something more deliberate. The question was what Tier 2 would look like. He'd told me she would use me, and walking back up toward the house, I saw clearly how she could, because I was the one who'd spent 32 years showing her it was possible. Osprey Bluff Estate rose from the cliff the way it always had, salt wind having worked the timber walls to a deep gray, the October light bouncing off the windows. Diane and I had built it in 1991. Every beam was a choice we made together. The stonework in the foundation, the pitch of the deck designed to hold the afternoon sun as long as the day would allow. Looking at it then, I found myself reading something else into those walls, layered through them the way strata build in rock. Every dollar that had ever flowed out of my account and into my daughter's life. Duke Law School, 200,000 Yazadun, drawn entirely from savings over 3 years. I could still feel the satisfaction of writing those checks, the image of my daughter becoming an attorney, carving out the kind of steady, purposeful life that Diane and I had built from nothing. Then came the Charlotte apartment, $500 every month, for 18 months after she passed the bar. I absorbed the full cost while she settled into the firm, assembled her book of business, figured out how to carry the weight of corporate law. $153,000 in total, and I had written every check without hesitation. Then 2017 arrived with a phone call and a request for $180,000, which she described as a time-sensitive investment opportunity. I transferred the funds that same afternoon. When I followed up 6 months on asking how things had developed, she told me it hadn't worked out, that these things happen sometimes, that it had been a learning experience. It wasn't an investment at all. It was her first margin call. I stopped there in the driveway, feeling the full mass of that understanding settle into my chest. She'd been trading on leverage since at least 2017, bleeding money faster than any salary could replace it, and I had covered her losses without pressing her on a single hard detail. During their visit the previous week, I'd come across a financial statement Griffin had left sitting on the side table in the guest room. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a glance. But now the figure came back to me with absolute precision. Total debt load, $4.2 million. $4.2 million. I had given Petra everything: education, housing, bailouts, second chances, everything, except the one lesson Diane had wanted her to absorb, that nothing is available for free indefinitely. That money is the product of labor and sacrifice and self-discipline, not something you extract from the people who care about you. 30 years I had spent mistaking generosity for wisdom. They are not the same thing. One opens its hand without asking questions. The other asks questions first and occasionally closes its hand. But today I resolved I would learn to do both, even if the lesson was arriving several decades behind schedule. I went inside, put on coffee, and took my usual seat at the kitchen table, the same table where Petra had struck me 3 nights earlier. The house had taken on a different quality, hushed, expectant, as though something was gathering itself. 3 days on October 2nd, my phone lit up. Petra's name. I gave it 2 rings before picking up. "Dad," she said, and her voice was fractured. Tears or a very convincing imitation of them. "Dad, I need to talk to you." I offered nothing in return, just held the line and let the silence work. "I've been under so much pressure," she went on. "Work has been relentless, and Griffin and we're in a bad place. The marriage is falling apart. I feel like I'm going under, and I just want to come home." Still, I said nothing. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know the whole thing with the paperwork was wrong. I was in a desperate place and I made a terrible choice, but I want to make it right. I want to come back and be here for you. That house is too big for you to rattle around in alone. Let me come home, Dad, please." I turned toward the window and the ocean beyond it. Swells were stacking up offshore, a storm system working in from the northeast, the kind of weather Diane used to love. Dramatic, raw, transparent about what it intended. I knew what this was too. This was Tier 2. The legal channel had shut on her. So now came the performance, the repentant daughter arriving, tearful and humbled, engineering a position inside my home where she could shape the story, manage who reached me, and ultimately manage me. Conrad had laid it out plainly. She's going to use you. Your health, your age, your isolation. And I was about to open the door and let her walk right in. "All right," I said, voice level. "Your room is exactly the way you left it." Petra's breath caught audibly. "Really? You mean it?" "Yes," I said. "Come home, Petra. We'll work through this." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Dad. I'll be there tomorrow. Is that all right?" "Tomorrow is fine," I said. I set the phone on the table. In geology, we call it exploratory drilling. You don't speculate about where pressure is building underground, where the fault lines are developing, where the reserves have pooled. You situate the drill bit over the most likely coordinates and push it down into the earth. You read the resistance, the shifts in density, the chemical signatures coming back in the extracted core. You let the formation disclose what it holds. Petra believed she was moving in to complete what she'd started. She thought she was taking up the position she needed to execute whatever came next in her plan. She had no idea I was about to turn my own home into a research site, and she was the subject of the study. But there was something I needed to establish first. How far she was actually prepared to go. What came after locked doors and forged documents. What Tier 3 looked like and Tier 4. And however many layers this scheme had built into its structure. I stood at the window as the late afternoon light raked across the Atlantic and thought about Conrad's voice that morning. Let her think she's smarter than you. Let her think you're weak and will build the case while she digs herself deeper. I was not weak. I was not confused. I was not going to lie down and let my daughter take the house Diane and I had put our lives into. But I was prepared to let her believe all of those things. I was going to let the drill bit sink, and I was going to pay close attention to what came back up in the core sample. Petra was arriving tomorrow. I wouldn't have long to learn exactly where her limits were. The dull thud of suitcases dragged up the wooden staircase told me the laboratory had opened for business. My daughter and son-in-law settling onto the second floor, certain they held every card. They came on the afternoon of October 3rd. 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, and Lena carrying her rag doll. Petra embraced me at the door, holding on a beat longer than she needed to. "Thank you for this, Dad," she murmured. "I promise I'll make it right." Griffin took the boxes upstairs without once looking at me. I watched him vanish into the guest room at the far end of the hall. That evening, I brought extra towels up to the second floor. The corridor was dim, lit only by the amber wall sconce. Through Petra's door, I could hear Lena's voice reading from a picture book. I passed Griffin's room. The door was open about 3 inches. I glanced through the gap and saw him folded over his phone, his thumbs moving fast. The screen threw a hard light into the dark room. I registered the message before he noticed me. "Audra, 8:00 p.m. tonight. Impossible. She's watching." Griffin looked up. We held eye contact for one suspended second, neither of us moving. Then the phone went face down on the mattress, and the color drained from his face. I stepped quietly to his doorframe and knocked. "Extra towels," I said, without any change in my voice. "Extra blankets are in the hallway closet if the temperature drops." "Sure, thanks," Griffin said, the words coming out constricted. I passed him the towels and returned downstairs. Audra. I had no idea who she was or what thread she represented in all of this, but one thing was already evident. Whatever a man scrambles to conceal when he's caught is almost always the thing he can least afford to lose. And what had moved across Griffin's face wasn't embarrassment. It was fear. I added the name to the file I was building, one more variable in an equation still taking shape. Over the course of my career, I have drilled thousands of exploratory wells, and the most essential skill isn't selecting the right location. It's knowing how to interpret what the bit carries back to the surface. You don't rush to conclusions. You gather the samples. You log what you find. You wait until the data arranges itself into a pattern. 3 days later, on the morning of the October 5th, the drill brought up something I had not wanted to find. I'd been up since 5 that morning, not insomnia, but readiness. 2 days prior, I had taken a small convex mirror from my geological survey kit, the kind we used for observing cave roof stability without scaffolding, and placed it on the kitchen windowsill behind the coffee maker, angled to throw a reflection across the full length of the counter. From my chair in the breakfast nook, I could take in the entire surface in that curved image without anyone realizing they were being observed. At 6:45, Petra came down in her bathrobe. She didn't register me sitting in the nook behind my newspaper. She went directly to the coffee maker, filled my usual mug, the green ceramic one Diane had bought me, and placed it on the counter. Then she reached into her bathrobe pocket and produced a pill bottle. In the convex mirror, I watched her tap a single white pill onto the cutting board and reduce it to powder with the back of a spoon. She swept the powder into the coffee and stirred it, tapping the spoon against the rim 3 times before rinsing it under the tap. She turned, caught sight of me in the breakfast nook, and her face opened into a smile. "Good morning, Dad," she said pleasantly, bringing the mug over. "I made it just the way you like it." I glanced up from the paper and returned the smile. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I closed both hands around the warm ceramic and raised it, as though I were about to drink, then rested it on the table. "I'll let it cool a moment," I said. "Still a bit hot." Petra gave a small nod and stepped out to the deck phone already in hand. I held still until I heard the sliding door close behind her. Then I rose, carried the mug to the sink, and emptied it completely into the potted succulent on the windowsill. I rinsed the mug once, then used a butter knife to scrape the residue from the bottom into a small plastic zip bag, the same type I'd relied on for collecting soil samples in West Texas, the kind that closes airtight and preserves chemical composition intact. I sealed it, tucked it inside a brown manila envelope, and wrote Conrad's home address on the front. Nothing to draw attention, just an old man posting a letter. My own daughter had attempted to drug me at my kitchen table, and I had gathered the evidence with the same steady hands that had mapped underground oil reserves across 3 decades of fieldwork. I went to my study and composed a brief note to enclose with the sample. "Conrad, this is what Petra put in my coffee this morning, October 5th, 6:45 a.m. I need to know what it is and what it does. Don't use the house line. She may be listening. Warren." I folded the note, sealed it in the envelope alongside the sample bag, and left it by the front door for the morning pickup. Inside that little plastic bag was evidence of criminal assault. I didn't yet know what the substance was, though I would later learn it was quetiapine, a powerful antipsychotic never prescribed to me, formulated to produce cognitive confusion and memory loss. But the evidence was only half of what I needed. The other half was understanding precisely what Petra intended to do with a father she was methodically working to make appear mentally unfit. I stood at the window, watching my daughter out on the deck phone to her ear, speaking in a register too quiet for me to catch. I wouldn't have to wait long for Conrad's answer. His call came through at exactly 9:47 on the morning of October 7th. Not a text, a direct call. And the way he said my name told me the sample had come back worse than I'd allowed myself to anticipate. "Warren," he said, "I need you to meet me right now. Monteo Stop and Shop. Parking lot far corner near the loading dock. Don't mention to anyone where you're headed." I drove in silence, both hands on the wheel, watching the October trees go by in a blur. Conrad was already there when I pulled in, leaning against his truck with his arms folded. He had the look of a man who hadn't slept. I parked and crossed the lot to him. "What did you find?" I asked. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded lab report. "Quetiapine," he said. 400 milligrams. Never prescribed to you, completely absent from your medical file. This constitutes elder abuse under New York Penal Law, Section 260-32. Aggravated given the systematic pattern and the financial motive behind it. I stared at the page. The drug's chemical name meant nothing to me, but the dosage figures and the red-flagged cautions did. "What does it do to someone?" I asked. "It's an antipsychotic," Conrad said. "At high doses, it produces severe cognitive deterioration. lethargy, disorientation, erosion of memory. After 6 to 8 weeks of consistent administration, you'd be presenting with symptoms indistinguishable from dementia or neurological disease, exactly what you'd need to support a guardianship petition. I creased the paper and handed it back. You said you needed me here right now, I told him. That means there's something else. Conrad gave a single nod. I logged the sample with Dare County PD the day it arrived, he said. Clean chain of custody from the moment you dropped it in the mail. Detective Sergeant Caden Pruitt is running it. He's 16 years, with the department built his record on patience and ironclad evidence. He recognized a prosecutable case the instant I set your sample in front of him. And the FBI field office in Raleigh has come on board. Conrad said this has federal wire fraud written across it. If Petra moves to exploit a fraudulent guardianship to reach your assets or shift property title that's interstate commerce federal jurisdiction, Detective Pruitt made the referral yesterday. This isn't a family matter anymore, Warren. You're at the center of a federal criminal investigation. The FBI. Federal agents were now tracking my daughter the same way she imagined she was tracking me. I drove back to the house with my hands perfectly still on the wheel. What's my role in all of this? I asked. Conrad's face held no softness. You behave exactly as you have been, he said. Let Petra wire her own trap. Every dose she administers, every lie she constructs, every camera she plants, it all becomes evidence. We need her to go all the way in. We need documentation. We need a pattern so unambiguous that no defense attorney can claim accident or misunderstanding. How long will that take? As long as it requires, Conrad said. Weeks, possibly. Can you hold? I thought about Diane. I thought about Lena. I thought about the house on that cliff that Petra was working to take. Yes, I said. 2 days later, on the morning of October 9th, Petra and Griffin drove into Manteo to pick up groceries. I watched their car work its way down the gravel drive, then went to my study and pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Inside lay an RF signal analyzer, a radio frequency detector, the same instrument I'd carried during geological site surveys to locate buried metallic pipe and underground cabling by reading electromagnetic emissions. I'd acquired it in 1995, and it had never failed me. I powered it on and began in the living room. The detector responded immediately near the wall clock, a rhythmic pulsing tone signaling an active transmission. I climbed onto a chair and examined the clock face closely. There, tucked behind the numeral 6, was a pinhole no larger than a pencil point, a camera lens. I moved to the hallway. The detector sounded again at the electrical outlet midway down the corridor. I eased off the faceplate with care. A second camera built into what appeared to be a screw head, the bedroom next. The detector led me to the picture frame on my dresser, the one holding a photograph of Diane and me from 1993, standing on the beach below this very house. The camera was nestled in the frame's decorative corner. Then my study, the desk lamp, a camera in the base angled to cover anyone seated at the desk. 4 cameras in total. She had been recording me for days, perhaps longer. Every movement, every exchange, every unguarded moment. I had believed I was alone in my own home. I stood in the study with the RF detector in my hand and felt a cold, settled fury move through me. Then I arrived at my decision. I left every camera precisely where it was. In geology, we call it controlled detonation. You don't attempt to prevent the explosion. You simply ensure it occurs at the exact place and moment of your choosing. Petra wanted footage establishing that I was losing my mind. I was perfectly willing to give her a performance. Over the next 3 days, I delivered one. I passed the hallway camera and let my step falter, steadying myself against the wall. I stood in the living room, gazing toward the water, and called out, Diane, where did you put the car keys? I lifted the television remote and turned it over in my hands as though I were examining something unfamiliar, then set it on the kitchen counter rather than the coffee table. I called the coffee maker a toaster. I put on mismatched socks. Every stumble was deliberate, every hesitation scripted. I gave Petra exactly the material she needed for her guardianship petition footage of a disoriented, diminished old man, no longer capable of managing his own life. But I held the controls. I selected which rooms, which hours of day, which specific behaviors would register as cognitive decline to a clinician reviewing the footage later. And critically, I made certain the cameras captured none of the moments that counted. The moments when I emptied her poisoned coffee into the plant. The moments when I swept the house with the RF detector. The moments when I sat at this desk entirely clear-headed, setting down detailed notes for Conrad and Detective Pruitt. Petra thought she was assembling a documentary record of my deterioration. She had no idea I was selecting every scene that made it into the cut. The question remained, what else was she planning that I hadn't yet uncovered? I wouldn't need to wait long for the answer. What else Petra had in motion disclosed itself through the most guileless voice in the house. My granddaughter humming a playground melody in the living room, the rag doll in her arms containing the voice recorder I had fitted 3 weeks before. Lena came for the weekend on Saturday, October 12th. She was 8 years old, and she extended her trust to everyone around her, which opened something in me I couldn't put a name to. That evening at dusk, she settled on the living room floor, braiding yarn into the doll's hair, and singing quietly to herself, while I stood at the kitchen sink, washing up. I had modified that doll on September 20th, before any of this had begun. Lena had left it behind on her last visit 2 summers back, before the silence set in, and I'd kept it on the guest room shelf, waiting for her return. When Petra called to say they were coming, I had 1 week. 72 hours of battery life per charge, enough runway to be careful. Tucked inside the stuffing, a professional-grade voice recorder and a compact GPS tracker. Lena never felt the difference. Each time she came to visit, I'd pull the device, transfer the audio to my laptop in the small hours, then tuck everything back before morning. The vast majority of what I recovered was ordinary. Lena humming to herself. Lena narrating little stories at the doll. The ambient hiss of whatever corner of the house the toy had been left in. That particular evening was different. I had my hands in a soapy pan at the sink when Petra's voice reached me from the kitchen alcove just out of sight around the bend. Low, nearly a whisper. But the doll was sitting on the living room floor, roughly 8 ft from the alcove entrance, and that recorder could pull voices through drywall without breaking a sweat. "What day is Dr. Albright coming?" Griffin answered, his voice tight and quiet. "Wednesday." Then Petra. "He says 3 more weeks of video footage and the Article 81 petition is ready to file." I stopped moving. My hands hovered in the water, perfectly still. "And you're sure he'll testify?" Griffin asked. "He's done this before," Petra said. "He knows exactly what to say. Dad will never see it coming." Footsteps then. Retreating, heading back toward the staircase. I resumed scrubbing slow and unhurried and kept at it until I heard their bedroom door meet the frame upstairs. Only then did I rinse off, dry my hands, and step into the living room. Lena was arranging the doll inside a shoebox she'd fashioned into a little bed. "Bath time, sweetheart," I said, and my voice carried nothing, no tremor, no weight. Just a grandfather and his granddaughter on an ordinary evening. Later, with Lena asleep and every light in the house out, I put on headphones in the workshop and replayed it all. Article 81. That statute was not unfamiliar to me. In 2017, I'd watched it dismantle a man I'd known for years, Floyd Henning, a structural engineer from Long Island. His son used Article 81 against him, and Floyd never understood what was happening until the judge had already signed the order, making the boy 34 years old his legal guardian. Every financial decision, every medical choice, every question of where Floyd slept and who he was permitted to talk to, all of it, transferred in a stroke of a pen. Floyd was gone 18 months after that, dead in a nursing home. His son listed the house 3 weeks after the burial. Article 81, a statute written to defend the elderly from those who would prey on them. And Petra intended to bend it into a crowbar to seize legal control over every dollar I had, every treatment I received, every detail of how I lived out whatever years I had left. I sat there in the dark long after the recording dissolved into static, and I understood with complete clarity where this was heading. 4 days on Wednesday, October the 16th, 10:00 in the morning, Dr. Declan Albright came through the front door. Petra had floated it at dinner the evening before, her voice draped in the careful register of a dutiful daughter. "Dad, I've asked a doctor to come by in the morning. Routine check, you've seemed a bit off lately, and I just want to put my mind at ease." I'd looked at her and said, "That's thoughtful of you, sweetheart," and meant none of it. Albright was 48, his business card confirmed it. A psychiatrist. He arrived in a slate-gray suit that said corporate litigator without trying too hard, and on his wrist sat an Audemars Piguet stainless case, probably $35,000, gleaming in the morning light that angled through the living room windows. That was not the watch of a man scraping by on standard clinical fees. I stored that observation carefully. "Mr. Caldwell?" he said, offering his hand grip, efficient and brief. "I'm Dr. Albright. Your daughter thought a routine cognitive assessment might be worthwhile. Nothing alarming." "Of course," I said. "Can I get you some coffee?" He declined, lowering himself onto the sofa and producing a clipboard from his bag. "Shouldn't take long at all. A handful of straightforward questions. The mini mental state examination. 30 items, 30 possible points. The standard instrument clinicians use to screen for dementia and cognitive decline. I had studied the entire protocol the morning after I found the cameras. Albright worked through the early questions, the year, the season, the state. I gave him clean, accurate answers each time. He laid 3 objects on the table, a pen, a watch, a key, and asked me to hold them in memory. I named them back without hesitation. Then he told me to spell world in reverse. I let a pause stretch, looking slightly uncertain. "Der-O-W," I said. "Incorrect." 1 point off the tally. Then came counting down from 100 in increments of 7. I offered 93, 86, 79, 72, then stopped as though the thread had slipped away. Wrong again. Another point gone. There is a principle in field geology. When you want to understand where a rock formation will give way, you don't smash it. You introduce measured stress and watch where it yields on its own terms. Albright required evidence that something was wrong with me. My task was to furnish just enough of that evidence to make his eventual report credible while staying well short of the threshold that would bring emergency measures down on my head. When the last question was answered, I had dropped exactly 6 out of 30, landing at a score of 24. Just beneath the lower boundary of what the clinical standards call normal function. Sufficient to warrant concern, sufficient to justify follow-up evaluation, sufficient in time to anchor a guardianship petition. Albright's pen moved across the clipboard. Then he raised his eyes toward Petra, who had occupied the corner chair throughout the session, without making a sound. A small, contained nod passed between them. "Well, Mr. Caldwell," he said, getting to his feet and stowing the clipboard away. "I believe that covers it. I'll have my findings over to your daughter within the next few days." "Thank you, doctor," I said. He left. Petra accompanied him to the front door. Whatever they exchanged, there was too hushed for me to catch. When she returned, she took the cushion beside me and rested her hand over mine. "Are you all right, Dad?" Soft voice. Worried eyes. "Just a little tired," I told her. And that was the only true thing I'd said to my daughter in weeks. The rest of it, every response, every nod, every mildly confused pause had been a performance. But I now held the full shape of what was coming, 3 more weeks of footage collected, then a courtroom filing, then a judge putting pen to paper and surrendering my life to the woman who had struck me across the face in front of my granddaughter. Not if Conrad turned up what I believed he was going to turn up about Dr. Declan Albright's history. He did. The call reached me at 6:15 on a Friday morning. I was in the workshop drawing sandpaper along an old geological drill, bit something I do when my mind needs to settle. The phone buzzed against the workbench surface. Conrad's number. First ring. "Tell me," I said. "Dr. Declan Albright, MD." Conrad's voice was trimmed down to the essentials. New York medical license number 087234. In 2017, the Wake County DA opened an investigation guardianship fraud. The victim's family alleged a manufactured diagnosis. The case fell apart before trial. Witnesses wouldn't cooperate. I put the sandpaper down and stood still. Then, 2019, he continued. Dare County. The same playbook. Article 81 filing a psychiatric evaluation, the victim's prior records couldn't support a documented pattern of sudden cognitive decline appearing from nowhere. The victim passed away 3 weeks before the matter could go forward. No surviving complainant. "And now he's here," I said. "And now he's here," Conrad said. Third time, and the FBI has just folded him into the active joint case file alongside Detective Pruitt. Warren, a documented pattern of conduct, is an enormous asset for the prosecution. This is no longer one suspicious incident. This is serial fraud. I stood at the workshop window. Gray October sky, flat and still. "Your read?" I asked. "Then Albright is where this thing cracks." Conrad said no inflection at all. "He's run this scheme twice and walked both times. The third attempt is where it ends. The moment federal agents appear at his door carrying 2 prior investigations and your toxicology results, he will give way completely. And once he starts talking, every person above him comes with it. In geology, that's a fault line. The whole mountain doesn't need to come down. You locate the fault and bring exactly the right force to bear at exactly the right moment, and the structure does the rest on its own." "Stepling?" I asked. "Pruitt is being thorough," Conrad said. 2 to 3 more weeks. They won't move until the file is unassailable. Can you manage that?" I thought about the cameras recording the slow accumulation of staged confusion, the 3-week window Petra had named. "Yes," I said. 4 nights after that conversation at 2:00 in the morning on October 22nd, something pulled me out of sleep. A floorboard, not the random pop of an old house adjusting to the night air, but a deliberate, measured pressure. Footsteps taken by someone who did not want to be heard. I held myself motionless and listened. Another board nearer. Then the barely audible click of my study door being eased open. I came out of bed without a sound. Bare feet on the wood floor. The hallway lay dark except where pale moonlight crossed from the window at the far end. I flattened myself against the wall and worked my way toward the study, then stopped at the doorframe. Petra was on her knees in front of the safe, working a letter opener against the lock. I watched her for 3 full seconds. "Looking for something?" I asked, voice level. She wheeled around the letter opener, still gripped in her fist. In the moonlight, her expression held nothing but fury. "Where is it?" she hissed. "Where's the original will?" "In the safe," I said. "Same place it's been for 3 years. "You're going to open it," she said, rising. "Right now." "I know," I said. What followed happened in an instant. Petra's hand came across my face hard enough to send my reading glasses spinning off and clattering onto the wooden floor. The same spot she'd struck 3 weeks before, the same hot ache spreading across my cheekbone. But she didn't stop there. Both palms hit my chest, and she shoved, and I went down hard, my head clearing the corner of the desk by almost nothing. "Look at yourself," she screamed, standing over me. "You're losing your mind. Tomorrow the doctor signs the papers and this estate belongs to me. Do you understand? It belongs to me." I didn't move. I lay on the floor in the dark, my cheek pulsing, and I counted. 1, 2, 3. My eyes went to the desk lamp, the one with the hidden camera Petra had mounted there weeks ago. The lens was trained directly on the scene, capturing every second of it. The angle was ideal. Petra looming above me, voice raised while I stayed flat on the floor. No resistance, no threat, just an elderly man put there by his own daughter. 10, 15, 20. I reached 63 seconds before she finally stormed out, pulling the door shut hard behind her. 63 seconds of her own camera recording me lying motionless on that floor, not fighting back, not raising a hand, just there with a cut on my head, where it had caught the desk leg on the way down. 63 seconds of plain, unambiguous evidence that this father was not a danger to himself or anyone else. 63 seconds establishing that I was the one being assaulted systematically in my own home. It was a receipt purchased in pain, and I intended to collect on it. I stayed down another full minute after she left. Then I got up slowly. My glasses had survived. I wiped them on my shirt and pocketed them. My hands carried a faint tremor, not fear, just adrenaline burning off. Looking at where Petra had stood a moment ago, I could read her with perfect clarity. The fury, the desperation, the unshakable conviction that she already had this one. What she hadn't worked out was that every camera she'd hidden in this house was now feeding into something she didn't control. 3 days earlier, while she and Griffin were in Monteo running errands, I had slipped a small black box behind the basement router, a network tap that mirrored every video stream directly to a secure cloud server at Conrad's security firm. Detective Pruitt now had copies of all of it. The poisoning on October 5th, tonight's assault, every bit of it holding an unbroken chain of custody. And come morning, I was going to show her what happens when you try to run a scheme against a geologist who has spent 30 years learning to read what lies buried beneath the surface. Because I still had one more countermeasure she couldn't have seen coming. That countermeasure required her to be out of the house. On the morning of October 23rd, I stood at the upstairs window and watched the black Cadillac Escalade roll through the outer gates toward Monteo. I waited until the engine noise had gone completely, then made my way down to the workshop and lifted the laptop from the hidden floor compartment below the workbench. I had built that compartment in 1992 to hold field survey equipment. These days, it protected something of greater value: 3 decades of technical experience coordinating remote sensing arrays across geological drilling operations on 3 continents. Petra believed her camera network was sophisticated. To my eye, it was elementary. I opened the laptop and brought up the network mapping software I'd originally used to manage underground seismic monitors in Alaska. The basement router announced itself at once, a consumer-grade Linksys model broadcasting on channel 11, password protected, but running firmware that was 7 years out of date. I was into the admin panel in 40 seconds. 4 cameras appeared as connected devices: living room clock, hallway outlet, bedroom frame, study lamp. Each one pushing its video stream to a local storage drive Petra had stashed in the basement crawlspace. She was almost certainly reviewing that footage every night while I slept, watching for signs of the decline she needed to document. What she had no way of knowing was that I could replicate the entire feed. I installed a concealed secondary uplink, a mirror protocol that copied every byte of video data and routed it to Conrad's secure cloud server at his consulting firm in Monteo. The cameras went right on working exactly as they had before. Nothing Petra saw when she reviewed her recordings would look different. But every frame now existed in two places at once. Detective Pruitt had access to the cloud server. All of it time-stamped, encrypted, and cataloged with legally sound chain of custody. The coffee poisoning on October 5th, both physical assaults, every staged episode of apparent cognitive decline, duplicated and secured somewhere Petra could never reach, never erase, never pretend wasn't there. Diane used to say she read strata like an open book. Petra's camera system was no different to me, a transparent record writing out its own indictment, now sitting in a vault whose existence she didn't even suspect. I sent an encrypted message to Conrad, mirror active, chain of custody green. His reply came back inside 10 seconds. Kowalski's got the feed. We're golden. I shut the laptop, replaced it in the hidden compartment, and went upstairs to make breakfast. When Petra came home 2 hours later with grocery bags, I was at the kitchen table with the newspaper in front of me every bit, the old man with nothing pressing on his mind. 2 days after that, on the afternoon of October 25th, I told Petra I had a medical scan scheduled in Greenville and would be away most of the day. "Would you like me to come with you?" she asked, the concern in her voice practiced and seamless. "No," I said. "I can manage." I drove instead to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Field Office, a low brick building roughly 15 miles east of the estate. Inside, a conservation officer named Gareth Wexley was working through easement applications behind a gray metal desk with the methodical patience of a man who had processed enough of them to know exactly what he was looking at. He was around 55, wire-rimmed glasses, and the settled expression of someone who'd witnessed more than his share of families fighting over land. He could tell when a man was trying to protect something that genuinely mattered. I sat across from him and pushed the completed application over the desk. "Osprey Bluff Conservation Easement," I said. 12 acres, Dare County. I want it permanently barred from commercial development. Wexley went through the paperwork carefully, turning each page. "And you understand this easement is permanent, Mr. Caldwell. The land cannot be commercially developed. No resorts, no casinos, no hotels, no subdivision. It remains residential only. Forever." "I understand completely," I said. "My late wife and I built that house ourselves in 1991. It will stay exactly what it is." Wexley nodded and brought a heavy red seal down on the application. "I'll file this with the Dare County Clerk's office this afternoon. It'll be a searchable public record by end of business today." I drove from Greenville to the county clerk's office and watched Wexley hand-deliver the stamped easement to the recording department himself. The clerk fed it into the system while I stood at the counter. 3 minutes later, it appeared in the public database, time-stamped and indexed. Osprey Bluff Estate Permanent Conservation Easement. Commercial development prohibited under New York Environmental Conservation Law, Section 49.30.1. To anyone who has ever faced the choice between defending what they built and letting someone take it, because the fight seemed too steep. The law is a tool, and tools go to whoever learns to use them well. The easement meant that any agreement to sell the property for commercial development was legally void before the ink had a chance to dry. Whoever signed such a contract, whoever attempted to convey this land to a casino developer, a resort corporation, or any commercial interest would be committing fraud. Not civil fraud, criminal fraud, documented, demonstrable, prosecutable fraud, and if that person used counterfeit guardianship papers To execute the transfer, it crossed into federal wire fraud the moment money moved across state lines. I had just permanently destroyed the land's commercial value. Legally, publicly, irreversibly, anyone who tried to sell this headland to a commercial developer would be walking into a felony with the FBI standing there watching. All I had to do now was wait for Petra to try it. And to make certain she would, I needed to leave the front door wide open. I drove back to Osprey Bluff that afternoon and pulled into my usual spot. Petra was at the kitchen window, watching me come in, her face unreadable. She had no idea the ground beneath her feet was now dead to any commercial buyer. She had no idea every camera she'd planted was transmitting evidence to a federal investigator. All she saw was a tired old man returning from the doctor. What you're about to hear is the moment I had been quietly, carefully preparing for, and the moment she finally showed me exactly who she had become. Before we get there, tell me something. If someone you loved was working against you in secret, would you confront them the instant you knew, or would you wait and let the truth build its own case? And that was precisely what I needed her to believe, because the trap was already in place, and what remained was simply waiting. To draw Petra's next move, I had to give her a target she couldn't walk away from. On October 28th, 3 days after the conservation easement was filed, I pulled into the lot behind Cecile Dunmore's brick law office in Monteo and checked my rearview mirror one last time to be certain I hadn't been followed. Cecile Dunmore was 58, an attorney who had looked after my interests since 1992, when she'd handled the first refinancing of Osprey Bluff. She arrived at the conference room carrying a banker's box, reading glasses, already riding her nose, a woman who had spent 29 years earning my complete trust, and who picked up the phone on Sunday afternoons because she understood what loyalty actually required. Conrad was already there, seated at the long wooden table with his laptop open. "Warren," Cecile said, taking my hand. "Conrad gave me the broad outline, but I want it from you." I sat down and laid out the full account. The clam chowder, the forged deed, the locked door, the poison, the cameras, the slaps, the Article 81 petition. Cecile recorded it all in a leather-bound notebook, her handwriting tight and precise. When I was done, she set the pen down and looked at me above the rim of her glasses. "You've documented everything?" she asked. "Everything," I said. Toxicology sample with unbroken chain of custody video feeds mirrored to Conrad's secure server. The conservation easement filed and indexed. "Good," Cecile said. "Then let's build the mousetrap." Conrad turned his laptop screen toward us. "Atlantic Coastal Development, LLC," he said. "Delaware registration, corporate website, architectural portfolio. On paper, a $50 million firm specializing in luxury casino resorts on coastal headlands. In reality, a federal mousetrap. The site was convincing. Polished renderings of high-rise hotels, waterfront casinos, spa facilities. A management team with LinkedIn profiles and professional headshots. Press releases referencing previous projects in Myrtle Beach and the Outer Banks. "This is a shell company," I said. "This is an FBI-sanctioned undercover sting operation," Conrad corrected. "Watch." He clicked something on his laptop, and a video window opened. A man in his 40s, dark suit, seated in what appeared to be a federal building. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. "I'm Special Agent Garfield, FBI Field Office in Raleigh. Conrad briefed me on your situation. I want to confirm that Atlantic Coastal Development, LLC is now logged as an authorized bureau undercover operation under my direct supervision. This eliminates any entrapment defense your daughter has already demonstrated independent criminal intent through the poisoning, the assaults, and the fraudulent deed attempt. If she proceeds with a property sale using forged guardianship papers, she'll be doing so entirely of her own volition." "Thank you," I said. Garfield nodded and the feed went dark. Cecile drew 3 stapled documents from the banker's box and spread them across the table. "Here's the legal architecture," she said. "The moment Petra executes a contract with Atlantic Coastal using fraudulent guardianship papers, she triggers 3 separate federal felonies at once." She pointed to the first document. Federal Wire Fraud, Title 18, Section 1343. The sale contract would require electronic transfer of funds across state lines. Wire fraud the moment she signs. Second document, judicial forgery and fraud on the court. She was using a guardianship petition built on fabricated evidence and a corrupt psychiatrist to claim legal authority she didn't hold. Third document, commercial fraud and material misrepresentation. The conservation easement made the land legally incapable of commercial development. Any sale contract representing the property as available for casino use was fraudulent on its face. She would be selling something that cannot legally exist. Cecile looked up. "Warren, the conservation easement was brilliant. She cannot sell what she has no right to sell. And even if guardianship somehow goes through, the easement survives. It's permanent. It's on the public record. Anyone who signs a commercial development contract is committing fraud against the buyer." "And Petra will sign it," I said. "She'll sign it," Conrad confirmed, "because my undercover operative is going to offer her $18 million, 20% above market for immediate resort development. A woman carrying $4.2 million in debt isn't going to ask hard questions when salvation arrives with a premium attached. In 30 years of field geology, the moment before a major strike always had a particular quality to it. A certain stillness in the data, a convergence of signals all pointing at the same inevitable conclusion. This was that moment, except I was now drilling into human greed instead of bedrock. And I have never been more certain of a strike. We worked until nearly 7 that evening, closing every gap. The LinkedIn profile for Conrad's undercover operative. A polished headshot, a convincing employment history woven through legitimate development firms. The exact phrasing of the opening contact message, the $18 million offer, structured with a $5 million wire deposit to establish immediate federal jurisdiction. Cecile drafted the FBI cooperation agreement, the document that formalized my standing as a cooperating witness and shielded me from any accessory exposure. Conrad finalized the Atlantic Coastal website contact form, routing directly to his secure server. At 6:45, Cecile looked up from the last set of documents. "Warren, are you absolutely certain about this? Once it's in motion, there's no pulling it back. When the FBI moves, they move quickly. Your daughter is going to federal prison." I looked out the window at Monteo's streets going dark and answered without any hesitation at all. "I am absolutely sure," I said. She watched her husband strike her father in front of their daughter and asked me why I was being difficult. "I am absolutely sure." Cecile nodded and closed the banker's box. All that was left was the execution. It began exactly 1 week later on November 4th, in the most unremarkable way imaginable, a soft laptop notification and the blue glow of a screen reflected in my daughter's face at a different angle than every other evening. This was the glow of someone who believes their rescue has finally shown up. Petra was across the kitchen island from me, laptop open, working through what she'd described as client files from her Charlotte law firm. I was holding the newspaper or appearing to while tracking her in my peripheral vision, a skill I'd been refining for a month. The notification chimed at 7:32. Her eyes moved to the screen, then they stopped. Her fingers went motionless above the keyboard. Her whole body stilled in the particular way that told me this was not another email about a court filing or a scheduling matter. She clicked on something. I couldn't make out the screen from where I sat, but I could read her face, the way her lips parted slightly, the way she leaned in and went through whatever it was, a second time, then a third. I'd witnessed that expression before in oilfield negotiations. It was the look of a desperate landowner who has just received an offer they cannot refuse. The moment when a person understands that the number on the page is exactly what they need it to be, and caution becomes something they can no longer afford. Petra's fingers started moving again. Not the measured, careful keystrokes of an attorney reviewing a contract. The rapid, almost frantic typing of someone who needs to respond before the chance closes. 2 hours later, at 9:38, my phone buzzed. A text from Conrad, "Check your email." She replied. I excused myself to the bathroom and opened the message. Conrad had forwarded me Petra's response to Atlantic Coastal's LinkedIn outreach. "Thank you for reaching out. This opportunity aligns perfectly with our family's estate planning timeline. I would welcome an in-person discussion at your earliest convenience." 2 hours. That was how long it took her to reply to a stranger offering $18 million for property she didn't own, had no legal right to sell, and had never breathed a word to me about selling. I had waited 3 years for her to come home for a single dinner. I suppose that is the difference between a person being hunted by their debts and a man protected by his patience. At 10:47, after Petra had gone upstairs and the house had gone quiet, Conrad called. "She took the bait," he said, straight to the point. "Hook, line, and sinker. She's pushing for an in-person meeting next week." "Next week?" I repeated. "November 10th, Conrad said. My operative suggested lunch at a Charlotte steakhouse, neutral ground, professional setting. She accepted without hesitation. "And the FBI is recording everything. Every email, every LinkedIn exchange, every phone call," Conrad said. "The moment she signs a contract using fraudulent guardianship papers, it's federal wire fraud with an airtight evidence chain." I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, looking out at the black Atlantic, thinking about Diane. 2 days later, on the morning of November 6th, I collected my mail in the workshop and found a crisp white envelope stamped with the seal of the Dare County Superior Court. It felt heavier in my hands than it had any right to. Inside was an emergency order for an Article 81 guardianship hearing under New York mental hygiene law filed by Dr. Declan Albright, and petitioning that Petra Caldwell be appointed sole guardian of both the person and property of Warren Caldwell. The language was clinical and devastating. Due to documented severe progressive cognitive decay, memory loss, and financial incompetence posing immediate danger to himself and his estate, the court is respectfully petitioned to appoint emergency guardianship with full authority over medical decisions, financial transactions, and residential placement. Attached as exhibits were 3 video clips rendered as still frames on the legal paperwork. I recognized each one at once because I had staged every second of them. Exhibit A, me stumbling in the hallway, catching myself against the wall. Exhibit B, me standing in the living room, calling out, "Diane, where did you put the car keys?" Exhibit C, me holding a coffee cup, staring at it as though I'd forgotten its purpose. The court date was set for Wednesday, November 20th, 2021, 14 days out. I sat in the stillness of the workshop studying those 3 stills on crisp legal paper and understood with cold clarity how damning my own choreographed performances looked to a judge who had no idea he was watching a deliberate performance. I had handed Petra the exact footage she needed. Now I had to trust that Cecile could show the court what cameras capture and what they omit, the difference between a man whose mind is failing and a man executing a calculated plan. The clips had been heavily edited. No timestamps, no surrounding context, just 3 isolated moments that, arranged in sequence, told a tidy story of decline. What the footage did not show was the morning of October 5th, when Petra ground a pill into my coffee, while I watched her do it in a convex mirror. What it did not show was the night of October 22nd, when she struck me across the face and drove me to the floor, while her own camera captured every second. What it did not show was me in the workshop at midnight, completely clear-headed, composing detailed notes for Conrad and Detective Pruitt. The edited footage was a lie constructed on a scaffolding of truth. And I held the unedited version on a server Petra didn't know was there. I set the court documents on the workbench and looked at the 3 stills one final time. 4 days until the hearing. 14 days for Cecile to dismantle a petition backed by a corrupt psychiatrist's surgically trimmed surveillance footage, and a daughter prepared to commit perjury in open court. But I possessed something Dr. Albright and Petra didn't know existed. The unedited record showing precisely who was poisoning whom, who was striking whom, who was the predator and who was the prey. And beyond the evidence, I had something more valuable still. I had Diane's strategy. Diane's strategy wasn't written in any document or locked in any deposit box. It was written into time itself, 3 years between her death and Petra's 35th birthday. 3 years for Petra to choose patience over greed. And on November 8th, Conrad made me say that out loud. He arrived at the workshop with his headlights off, coming through the back trail we'd been using for weeks. The first thing he did was spread a master timeline across the workbench, every piece of evidence we'd gathered, every countermeasure I'd deployed, every trap we'd laid. Then he looked up and asked the question I'd been bracing for. "Warren, when did you actually start planning this?" I didn't answer right away. I stood looking at the timeline, the disappearing ink, the hidden mirror, the modified doll, the conservation easement, the camera tap. Conrad pressed. "You didn't construct a defense this airtight on pure instinct after she slapped you on September 29th. This level of preparation took years. When did you know?" I sat down on the workshop stool and said the thing I'd been carrying alone. "The day Diane asked me to sign that codicil in the hospital, spring of 2018, 6 months before she died." Conrad's expression didn't shift, but I watched understanding arrive behind his eyes. "She knew," I continued. "She knew exactly who Petra was. She'd known since Petra was 4 years old and started hiding candy behind her pillow instead of sharing it with the other kids at daycare. Diane watched our daughter grow into someone who wanted things more than she wanted people." The conditional inheritance," Conrad said quietly. "Wasn't just legal protection," I finished. "It was time, a buffer. 3 years for Petra to show which path she would choose, patience or greed. 36 dinners once a month. That was all Diane asked for. If Petra chose to wait to show up to simply be present, she would have inherited everything at 35 without lifting a finger." Conrad looked back at the timeline. "But if she didn't choose patience, then Diane had already drawn the map," I said. "She didn't leave me a set of instructions. She left me measured time and a piece of land she had calculated every inch of to protect us. And if Petra chose darkness, Diane knew I would need that map to bring her back into the light. I wasn't the mastermind. I was the engineer executing her strategy." Conrad held my gaze across the workbench for a long moment. "Diane was the smartest person in any room she ever walked into," he said finally. "Even from a hospital bed." "Yes," I said, "she was." 4 nights later, on November 12th, I was in the workshop at 11:45 p.m., listening to the day's audio logs from Lena's doll through my headphones. Most of it was familiar background, Lena singing the television, Petra and Griffin discussing grocery runs or Lena's school schedule. Then I heard a voice that brought me upright. "Dr. Albright, on the phone with Petra." So I secured an advance copy of the temporary letters of guardianship. Albright said, his voice clear and assured. "The judge's signature is already on it. You can use it this week before the formal hearing even begins." Petra's voice, "Is it legally active?" Albright. "On paper, yes. We just need to move before anyone double-checks the clerk's file. Once you have those letters in hand, you have immediate authority over his finances, his medical decisions, everything. The November 20th hearing becomes a formality. I stopped the recording and played it back 3 times, forging a judge's signature on official Superior Court guardianship documents. That wasn't medical malpractice. That wasn't civil fraud. That was forgery of a judicial instrument under New York Penal Law, Section 170, a Class D felony. Albright had just lurched headlong from medical fraud into institutional forgery, and Petra had just agreed to put it to use. Sometimes the best thing an engineer can do is step back and let gravity handle the rest. I called Conrad. He picked up on the first ring. "I need you to patch in Pruitt and Garfield," I said. "Right now." 2 minutes later, all 4 of us were on a secure line. I played the recording. When it finished, 5 full seconds of silence followed. Then Conrad's voice stripped to ice. "Warren, don't move. Let them use that document. They just crossed from a civil dispute into a federal felony. Detective Pruitt. Forging a judge's signature that's institutional forgery. Mandatory prison time even with a plea. Special Agent Garfield. We'll document every step. The moment she uses that forged paper to access his accounts or execute any contract, we have her on federal wire fraud and judicial forgery simultaneously." "How long do we hold?" I asked. 8 days, Garfield said. "Until the November 20th hearing. Let them commit fully. Let them believe they're winning. Then we bring the hammer down." I hung up and pulled off the headphones. The recording was still running behind me. Albright's voice, Petra's agreement, the sound of 2 people digging their own graves with practiced confidence. 8 days until the hearing. 8 days for them to deploy that forged document and seal their own fate. And I knew precisely when they would use it. On the morning of November 14th, 6 days before the hearing, I stood at the master bathroom mirror at 6:30 rehearsing the facial twitch that would sell the performance. Left eye first, then the corner of my mouth, until each movement looked involuntary rather than practiced. Dr. Albright arrived at 10 sueño with 2 witnesses. I was waiting in the library wearing mismatched socks and the previous day's shirt, deliberate wardrobe choices Petra had noticed, but said nothing about. When Albright came through the door, I looked up from the newspaper I had been pretending to read and smiled. "Sirhartich's Dr. Harding," I said, rising to shake his hand, deliberately wrong. The kind of small mislabeling that registers as slippage to anyone watching for it. "Is it, have we met before?" Albright's expression shifted into practiced professional concern. "It's Albright Warren," he said, gentle as a school nurse. "We've known each other for years. I was here just 2 weeks ago, do you remember?" I frowned, working through it as though searching a drawer I couldn't quite find, then gave a slow, uncertain nod. "Of course," I said. "I'm sorry. Sometimes the days run together on me." Albright introduced the 2 witnesses, a notary public named Paulette Harding and a court observer named Terence Orville. Both were present to validate my mental state for the guardianship petition. Both were professionals whose training included spotting deliberate performance. I gave them my most cooperative yet bewildered expression. The examination got underway. Albright asked what year it was. I said 2021. Correct. What season fall? Correct. What state were we in New York? Correct. Then I looked around the room, mildly urgent. "Where's Lena?" "She was just here. She's supposed to help me with the thing." Petra stepped forward, her hand settling softly on my shoulder. "Lena is at school, Dad," she said. "It's Tuesday morning." I looked at her, then at the window, as though trying to find my bearings in the room. During the signing, Albright leaned across to pass me the documents, and I caught his cologne bergamot and cedar expensive and cloying. The smell hit me unexpectedly, pulling up a real memory that had nothing to do with any performance. Lena's 8th birthday party, 3 months back, before all of this had started. I'd been carrying the cake in from the kitchen and spotted Petra standing alone by the garden wall, phone pressed to her ear, her face drawn with attention I hadn't understood at the time. The eye twitch that followed was genuine, 3 seconds of it before I pulled myself back. Albright asked me to read the documents. I lifted the first page, held it close, squinted, then let my hand drop. "They swim together," I said. "I can't." "That's perfectly all right," Albright said. "Your daughter can read them to you." Petra took the page and read in a steady, solicitous voice, while I watched the witnesses watching me. Harding was writing in her notepad. Orville sat back with his arms folded, observing. I let the eye twitch surface at measured intervals every 47 seconds, exactly as rehearsed. When the signing came, I produced my fountain pen, the same one charged with Diane's disappearing ink, and held it unsteadily above the signature line. "Did I do it right?" I asked when I'd signed, staring at my own hand. "I can't quite remember whether I already signed," Orville murmured something to Harding. I caught the words, "textbook vascular dementia progression." Albright recommended a follow-up evaluation, and Petra nodded, adding as though the thought had only just occurred to her that she was arranging a signing at Atlantic Coastal Bank the following week, during one of my better windows, just to keep the documentation clean. The witnesses exchanged a look. They were thoroughly convinced. They believed they were watching a man's mind come apart by degrees. By 11:15, they were gone. I stood at the library window and tracked Albright's car until it vanished at the end of the drive. Then I went to my study where Lena's doll was sitting on the desk, its small recording indicator blinking green. I locked the door, put on the headphones, and pressed play. The device had been running all morning, mostly background texture, footsteps, closing doors, the low murmur of Albright's voice from the library. Then, at 10:47 a.m., Griffin's voice came through tight and strained from somewhere else in the house. "Audra, I can't keep doing this. He looked me right in the eye this morning, and I swear he knows. Audra Pelham, the name I'd seen on his phone weeks earlier." "You're being paranoid," Audra said, her voice crackling through the speaker. "The evaluator just confirmed he's in decline. Everything is going exactly to plan." "What if it's not?" Griffin said. "What if he's playing us? I made copies, Audra, everything. The emails, the offshore accounts, all of it." I stopped the recording. The timestamp read 10:47 a.m., precisely the moment I'd been downstairs signing documents with disappearing ink and performing confusion for the witnesses. Griffin hadn't been in that room. He had slipped away mid-session to make this panicked call from somewhere else in the house, meaning his fear had been building on its own independent of anything he'd seen in the library. The performance hadn't caused his unraveling, it had only confirmed what he already suspected. I pressed play again. "Jesus Christ, Griffin," Audra said. "Where? Somewhere safe." Griffin said. "Somewhere they won't find it. If this goes sideways, I'm not going down by myself. If I go down, everyone goes down." There it was, the fracture point in the structure. Griffin had assembled his own insurance copies of emails, offshore account records, documentary proof of the conspiracy's origins. He was no longer merely a co-conspirator. He was a frightened accomplice sitting on a cache of evidence ready to trade it for immunity the moment everything started to give. I replayed the audio 3 times and took detailed notes. Then I encrypted the backup file and texted Detective Pruitt, "Need to meet tomorrow morning. I have something that changes everything." I got up and walked to the window overlooking the circular drive. Griffin's Range Rover sat in its usual place, filmed with a thin November rain. That conversation was coming soon enough. I went downstairs and found Griffin where I expected him, at the kitchen counter, pouring scotch into a glass. At noon, his hands shaking badly enough that the bottle clinked against the rim. Our eyes met across the island. I spoke very quietly. "We need to talk about where the door is, Griffin. The one you're going to use when you walk away from my family." Griffin's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "What door?" he asked, barely above a whisper. I gave him the same vacant smile I'd offered Dr. Albright an hour earlier. "The one I'm about to show you." Griffin set the glass down, slowly, eyes fixed on mine. The door I was offering wasn't mercy. It was survival. And the following morning at 6:00 a.m., I showed him exactly where it led. The garage door sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss, closing Griffin Hartwell inside with me and Detective Sergeant Caden Pruitt on a Wednesday morning that would determine whether my son-in-law walked into the DA's office or was delivered there in handcuffs. Pruitt stood by the workbench, arms crossed, saying nothing. I took out my phone and hit play. Griffin's voice flooded the garage, raw and unguarded. "Audra, I can't keep doing this. He looked me right in the eye this morning, and I swear he knows." Griffin's face drained of color. I let the recording run through to the end. All of it, the confession about the insurance, the hidden copies, the admission that if things fell apart, he wouldn't be falling alone. When it finished, I looked at him steadily. "You told Audra you made insurance," I said. "I need to know where it is, and I need that answer in the next 60 seconds, or Pruitt makes a phone call that ends your life as you know it." Griffin's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold his phone. The same hands that had co-signed offshore account documents. The same hands that had held Lena at her christening. The hands that were about to betray everyone he'd pledged himself to. Charlotte Schalkrintihum. Griffin said, his voice barely holding together. "Box 447, shell company called Prescott Holdings LLC. Everything's there, emails, wire instructions, the original Grand Cayman documents." And I pressed. Griffin looked at me, then at Pruitt, then back at me. "You don't understand," he said. "This started 2 years ago, before Lena was even born. Petra and Albright, they'd been planning this since 2019. Albright told her the estate was wasted on you, that you'd never recognize what she was capable of unless she took control herself. 2 years. While Diane was dying in the hospital, while I was signing that codicil, Petra was already being told by a corrupt psychiatrist that her father's land should belong to her. Here's what happens next," I said. "You have 24 hours to walk into the Dare County DA's office with Detective Pruitt. You hand over that safe deposit box key. You give full testimony about the conspiracy, the poisoning, the forgery, every piece of it. In exchange, Pruitt will recommend reduced charges, misdemeanor probation, no prison." "And if I don't?" Griffin asked. "Then you face a full indictment as a co-conspirator," Pruitt said. "Wire fraud, elder abuse, judicial forgery. You're looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Griffin sank onto the workshop stool, his head dropping into his hands. "I'll do it," he said at last. "I'll cooperate." "Good," I said. 3 days later, on Monday, November 18th, Petra sat in a corporate office in Charlotte and signed this contract that would destroy her life. I wasn't there. Conrad was. Conrad's undercover operative had arranged the meeting at Atlantic Coastal Development's Charlotte office, a rented conference room in a midtown high-rise, professional and polished. Petra arrived at 2:00 p.m., wearing a navy suit carrying the forged temporary letters of guardianship that purported to authorize the sale. Conrad watched from across the street, binoculars trained on the window phone to his ear, feeding me updates in real time. "She's signing the first page," he said. The Atlantic Coastal rep slid the wire authorization form across to her. I stood at the kitchen window at Osprey Bluff Estate, eyes on the water phone to my ear. Conrad's voice came through flat and precise. $5 million out of Dare County into Atlantic Coastal's Delaware account. Federal wire fraud the instant it landed. She'd used the forged guardianship papers to push the whole thing through. She told the rep her father's condition made it unavoidable. Conrad said that her conservator authority was total and legally airtight. Judicial forgery, elder abuse, wire fraud, all of it is on federal record now. It's done. She'd signed every page. The wire cleared. $18 million on the sale contract, $5 million already gone as the deposit. Warren, she just signed her own indictment. I set the phone on the counter. Something in Conrad's voice was different. A weight that had been there for months was simply gone. Clean satisfaction. Not the measured, careful cadence of a man still assembling his case, just the quiet breath of someone watching a long effort finally close. She just signed her own indictment. I looked at Pruitt, who stood in my kitchen, with the FBI comm channel open in his ear. Wire fraud, elder abuse, judicial forgery, federal record, all of it. Pruitt gave a nod and keyed his radio. Target has executed. Moved to phase 2. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table as November 19th came gray through the windows, a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands, my phone on the granite beside me. Pruitt's message hit at 5:47 a.m. Warrant signed. Strike team assembles at 0800. You should be somewhere else. I wasn't going anywhere. I intended to be standing in this house when they came for her. The FBI moved at 8 sharp on November 19th. I watched from the study window without turning away. Petra was in federal custody by noon. The following morning, I drove toward Elizabeth City and the courthouse where I meant to finish this. Cecile Dunmore was behind the wheel. Pre-dawn fog pressed against the windshield all the way to Elizabeth City, the kind that felt less like weather and more like a verdict. Neither of us spoke. Her briefcase held the toxicology report and psychiatric evaluations, proof that my daughter had been drugging me for 6 weeks and that Dr. Declan Albright had either failed to see it or decided not to. "You don't have to put yourself through this," Cecile said as we pulled into the courthouse lot. "The guardianship petition is essentially dead. Petra's been arrested. You've already won." "I need to finish it," I said. We walked through security at 8:45. The hearing was set for 9. Dare County Superior Court Courtroom 3B. Judge Loretta Quaid presiding. She was 62 with 23 years on the bench and a reputation for taking fraudulent conservatorship cases apart with precision. I walked into that courtroom at exactly 9:00 a.m. in a suit and tie, each step steady, my thoughts ordered, my voice ready. Petra sat 3 rows behind the petitioner's table in a navy suit, spine rigid, gaze fixed forward. She wouldn't look at me. She couldn't, because looking at me meant accepting that the man she'd branded incompetent was about to dismantle everything she'd built, in his own words. Judge Quaid brought the hearing to order. "This is an emergency petition for Article 81 guardianship," she read from the docket. "Petitioner Petra Caldwell seeks appointment as guardian of the person and property of Warren Caldwell, aged 60, citing severe progressive cognitive decline. Mr. Caldwell is represented by counsel. Ms. Dunmore, you may proceed." Cecile stood composed. "Your Honor, I am submitting 2 independent psychiatric evaluations completed within the past week. Dr. Nolan Hayes at Mount Sinai and Dr. Catherine Ruiz at Cornell both find that Mr. Caldwell exhibits no cognitive decline, no vascular dementia, and no impairment of any kind. He is fully competent. The documents went to the clerk. I am also submitting, Cecile continued, certified toxicology results from LabCorp showing therapeutic levels of quetiapine in Mr. Caldwell's bloodstream, an antipsychotic he was never prescribed and has never taken of his own will. The courtroom went very quiet. Judge Quaid lifted the toxicology report and worked through it carefully. The neutral procedural expression she'd worn shifted into something harder. The chain of custody is unbroken, Cecile said. Coffee residue collected from Mr. Caldwell's mug on October 5th was logged with Dare County PD under Detective Caden Pruitt's supervision on October 7th and tested by a certified independent lab. This isn't just medical evidence, Your Honor. It's criminal evidence. What Miss Caldwell called cognitive decline was deliberate ongoing poisoning. Judge Quaid's eyes moved to Petra. Miss Caldwell, did you give this medication to your father? Petra's attorney rose. Your Honor, my client invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Noted, said Judge Quaid. She turned to Dr. Albright, seated alongside Petra's counsel. Dr. Albright, you evaluated Mr. Caldwell on November 14th. Did your assessment include toxicology screening? Albright rose slowly. No, Your Honor. Based on the behavioral presentation and the family history I was given, I determined— You determined incorrectly, Judge Quaid said. Mr. Caldwell, please approach the bench. I walked forward. Judge Quaid looked at me directly. Do you understand what these proceedings involve? Yes, Your Honor. I said, my voice level. My daughter filed to have me declared incompetent so she could take control of my property and my medical decisions. The petition rests on fabricated psychiatric findings and cognitive symptoms she produced herself by medicating me without my knowledge or consent. Judge Quaid nodded. You may sit. Ms. Dunmore, your next witness. Dr. Declan Albright, Cecile said. Albright settled into the witness stand. The Audemars Piguet stainless case, probably $35,000 on his wrist, caught the courtroom light. Cecile approached with a folder. Dr. Albright, in the Feldman matter, Wake County 2017, was your psychiatric evaluation, the sole basis for an Article 81 petition. Albright shifted. Many cases share characteristics. Without the specific file, I can't say. That guardianship was overturned 18 months later when the ward was assessed by independent psychiatrists and found fully competent. Do you recall it? Vaguely, Albright said. And in Dare County 2019, another Article 81, another evaluation you supplied. That matter closed only because the ward died before proceedings finished. Do you recall that case? I know. I have Wake County investigation logs, Cecile said, handing documents to the clerk, and Dare County deposition transcripts. Both establish a pattern: rushed evaluations, financial ties to petitioning family members, and guardianships later scrutinized for fraud. I watched his hands tighten on the witness rail, the same hands that had held a pen on November 14th. And written moderate cognitive decline while I performed confusion I had never once felt. The trembling in them now was the first honest thing I had ever seen from him. Your Honor, Cecile said, Dr. Albright has a documented pattern of providing compromised evaluations in conservatorship fraud cases spanning at least 4 years. Judge Quaid's expression was stone. Dr. Albright, do you have anything to say in response? He never answered. Pruitt was already up from the back row, moving down the center aisle with deliberate calm. Your Honor, may I approach? Proceed, said Judge Quaid. Pruitt stepped to the stand. Dr. Albright, I'm Detective Caden Pruitt, Dare County PD. You are hereby notified that you are under active criminal investigation for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, professional fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. 3 seconds. Albright's face went from the flush of a confident man to ash gray. His eyes cut to Petra, then toward the exit, then back to Judge Quaid. I saw the instant a man understood that his career, his reputation, and his freedom were all expiring at once. Judge Quaid's gavel struck. This hearing is suspended pending criminal proceedings. The petition for guardianship is denied without prejudice. Dr. Albright, you are excused from the stand. This court is adjourned. Griffin Hartwell came into the corridor during the recessed leather portfolio. His attorney at his side, face pale but set with resolve. When his eyes found mine, I saw something I had never seen there before. The look of a man who had chosen survival over loyalty. Pruitt stepped toward him, hand extended. Griffin's attorney, sharp-eyed, wearing a slate-gray suit that said corporate litigator without trying too hard, set the portfolio on the bench and opened it with practiced efficiency. My client will provide full testimony under the cooperation agreement your office outlined, she said. The evidence is comprehensive and documented. Inside emails between Petra and Dr. Albright mapping out the psychiatric evaluation months before she ever set that clam chowder in front of me. Pharmacy receipts for quetiapine purchases filled under a fraudulent prescription written for a patient who did not exist, and a thumb drive. Pruitt inserted it into his laptop. The hallway noise, footsteps, voices, carrying through marble, fell back from our small circle of silence. This is Petra Caldwell's voice, Pruitt said, raising the volume. November 3rd. She's discussing moving assets into offshore accounts before the conservatorship is finalized. What came through that hallway wasn't the voice my daughter saved for me. That one ran warm, attentive, full of daughterly concern. What I heard on the recording was something stripped of all that. Cold, purposeful. Nathan has the account numbers ready in Grand Cayman, she said. Once Albright signs the evaluation, we file the Article 81 petition. Judge Quaid will appoint me guardian within 30 days. Then we liquidate the Outer Banks property, transfer the cash, and Dad becomes a line item in the budget. $600,000 a year to keep him comfortable until nature takes its course. I stood there absorbing it, my daughter's voice bare and businesslike, treating everything I'd built as something to be harvested at the right moment. This was who she was when she believed I wasn't in the room. When she'd written me off as too old, too soft, too blind to see what she'd grown into. Cecile's fingers closed around my elbow. I'd been swaying without knowing it. Does Lena know what you're doing? I put the question to Griffin low and even. His jaw went tight. She'll understand someday. Right now, I just need her to have one parent who's not in prison. Pruitt walked Griffin through what cooperation would look like. 1 misdemeanor conspiracy count, suspended sentence 2 years probation, no custody room enough to piece a life back together and a chance to be something real to his daughter again. But the recordings went further than liquidation timelines and account transfers. They established intent. They showed that Petra understood precisely what she was doing the morning she struck me. When she turned the deadbolt from the outside, when she dosed my coffee with quetiapine and sat back to watch for the fog that would make Dr. Albright's paperwork hold water. Every syllable captured on that thumb drive had been spoken to the man she'd pulled into the scheme alongside her, and every syllable now demolished whatever argument she might have made about coercion or ignorance. Cecile's phone went off. She checked the screen, then raised her eyes to mine with something I couldn't place. Petra just pulled $800,000 out of 3 separate estate accounts, she said, wired to offshore holding companies. She's running. Pruitt already had his phone at his ear. Where? Raleigh-Durham International Airport, Cecile said, eyes still on the screen. Terminal 4, one-way to Grand Cayman wheels up at 2:15 p.m. We got there at 1:47 p.m. Terminal 4 churned with the usual noise reunions near the doors, suits cutting through crowds, at a sprint travelers jamming luggage into the security lanes. Concourse B stretched out ahead of us, gate 23 at the far end. A federal tactical unit had already taken the boarding area. I picked Petra out before she saw me. She'd positioned herself near the gate agent's podium carry-on, at her feet leather bag, over one shoulder sunglasses, on indoors under fluorescent panels, because that's what someone wears when they're trying not to be recognized. Her whole body held the stillness of a person who senses the trap, but hasn't heard it spring. The lead FBI agent, steel gray hair, a voice built for courtrooms, moved in as Petra pushed her boarding pass across the counter. That's Petra Caldwell. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, judicial forgery. You're under arrest. Hands behind your back. She went still. The boarding pass left her fingers and settled on the carpet below. I came around from behind the line of agents. Her gaze tracked to me through the lenses. She left the glasses on. Atlantic Coastal Casino Development doesn't exist, Petra. I told her it was a federal shell company. You put your signature on a contract with the FBI. Every transfer, every authorization, all of it sits in an evidentiary record now. Atlantic Coastal Casino Development had never been anything but a construction of law enforcement built for one purpose: to give Petra a vehicle to commit wire fraud and document every move she made doing it. Each signature, each approval, each wire she pushed through, witnessed, time-stamped, preserved. Cecile and Conrad had drawn the blueprints. Petra had walked in and furnished the place herself, so certain an $18 million casino development could appear fully formed overnight that she never stopped to ask why it could. Petra's carry-on lay open on a security table already turned inside out. 2 passports her own, and a second counterfeit her face above a stranger's name. $47,000 in rubber-banded cash, and a silver-framed photograph of Lena. The single thing she'd chosen to carry into the life she'd planned on the other side of all this. Near gate 24, another woman stood watching. 30s clothes that cost real money, luggage that matched. A ticket for the same Grand Cayman departure was folded in her grip. That's Audra Pelham Pruitt said under his breath. Griffin's mistress, Charlotte real estate broker. Appears both of them had the same exit strategy. The betrayal had run deeper than anyone had mapped. Griffin hadn't only handed over evidence against Petra, he'd been sharing a bed with the woman Petra was counting on to get her out of the country. Petra held my eyes as the agent brought her arms back. You did this, she said. Flat. Dad, you set all of this up. No, I said. You did this when you decided your father's estate mattered more than his life. Steel on steel, the cuffs closing around Petra's wrists sent a sound across that terminal that I still hear. And I watched my daughter, my brilliant, beautiful, broken daughter, turn for one last look. What her face showed was fury, disbelief, a wall, but I could see past it to the little girl who climbed into my lap night after night, wanting the same book every time. She was gone now. The person in front of me was someone I didn't know. The morning after the arrest, I stood in a quiet kitchen and brewed coffee, watching the steam rise from the mug Diane reached for every Sunday. Winning, I understood, then feels indistinguishable from losing when the one you've defeated is the person you spent a lifetime loving. For 2 days, it sat in me that way. 2 days since the cuffs had closed at Raleigh-Durham International Airport. 2 days since I'd watched agents move Petra through Terminal 4 with people turning to look. 2 days since I'd pointed my car back toward Osprey Bluff Estate and driven home to a house that seemed to have forgotten how to hold sound. Below my study window, the Atlantic worked against the rocks. November poured pale, cold light through the glass. My coffee cooled untouched on Diane's desk, the desk where Petra had pressed my pen to paper 6 weeks ago, signing my name, releasing the first stone in what had become an avalanche that buried her in a Dare County cell. My phone rang at 9:30 a.m., Cecile Dunmore on the screen. She skipped the greeting. The federal docket is official. 4 counts against Petra. Wire fraud alone carries up to 20 years. Stack everything together, and she's looking at 25 if the jury comes back on all of it. I set the cup down on the wood. It didn't make a sound. And Albright. 3 counts, Cecile said. Medical fraud, judicial forgery, conspiracy. The state medical board pulled his license yesterday. Prison or not, he'll never see another patient. 25 years. Petra was 32. She'd be 39, walking out younger still than I'd been the season I charted my first major oil reserve, but old enough by then to have watched everything she valued turn to ash. How do you put a number on that distance between the daughter who laced her father's coffee and the child who used to hand him crayon drawings at the kitchen door? Is it 6 weeks of quetiapine? Or is it 30 years of decisions I was never in the room to see? What about Griffin, I asked. Misdemeanor plea went in yesterday. 2 years probation, no jail. He sat before the grand jury for 4 hours. The agreement is locked. The $5 million Petra had wired to Atlantic Coastal Casino Development was sitting in a federal evidence account going nowhere. Every email, every signed page, every recorded call. The Bureau's shell had done exactly what it was made to do. Warren, you won, Cecile said quietly. The conservatorship is gone. Your estate is intact. Everyone who came after it is now answering for it in a federal courtroom. So why don't you sound relieved? Because relief needs a villain. And every time I shut my eyes, I saw Petra at 7, gap-toothed, delighted, pressing a seashell she'd pulled from the sand into my palm and asking whether we could keep it forever. Thank you, Cecile, I said, for all of it. I set the phone down and watched the water until my coffee was cold. 7 days on, I made the drive to the Dare County Detention Center for visiting hours. The building hunched behind chain link topped with razor wire cameras sweeping the lot as I pulled in. Guards inside checked my ID and went through everything I'd brought. The visitation room hit you first with the smell floor cleaner and something heavier underneath it. Rows of plexiglass partitions broke the space into tight booths, a bolted stool on each side, a document slot at waist level. I took booth 7 and sat. Petra came through the door in an orange jumpsuit, hair back. Nothing on her face, shadows pressed deep under both eyes. She read younger than 32. She looked, in fact, like the daughter I'd known before Conrad Farwell and Dr. Albright, and the powder that had been finding its way into my morning cup. She sat. Neither of us spoke. We took each other in through the scratches in the plexiglass. I fed a document through the slot. Certified copy county seal in Boston blue, dated September 2018. This is your mother's codicil, I said. The one she had Clifton put to paper 3 weeks before she died. The section of her will she kept from you. Turn to the postscript, that's her hand. The document trembled in Petra's grip. I watched her work through it, the legal provisions, the asset schedules, the distribution clauses, until she turned to the final page and went still. Diane's handwriting crowded the margin blue ink on white paper. That same flowing script that had signed every birthday card, tucked notes into Petra's school lunchbox, filled letters home from college. When Petra started reading aloud, her voice came apart almost immediately. To my daughter Petra, the estate transfers to you at age 35, requiring only that you share dinner with your father once monthly for 36 months. Love cannot be inherited, but presence can be practiced. She stopped. Tears dropped onto the page. Mom. Behind the scratched plexiglass, I watched my daughter absorb her mother's words and witnessed the precise instant it shattered her. 36 dinners, Petra whispered. All I had to do was come to dinner. That's what she was asking. I told her that was everything Diane had ever asked of either of us to hold the family together. Petra was 32. Age 35 would come in 2024, 3 years out. 36 meals across 3 years. 3 hours each month sitting at a table, talking, being a daughter. That was what Diane had valued at $20 million. No schemes, no forged documents, no poison, only presence. The will made it plain Petra would have received everything at 35 under a single condition: 3 years of monthly dinners. Instead, she had poisoned her father, racked up multiple felony counts, and burned her own life to the ground, all while already holding what she wanted, waiting for nothing but time. I would have had it all, Petra said, her eyes fixed on her mother's handwriting. In 3 years, I would have had everything. I gave a slow nod, feeling Diane close in that silence between us. My wife, who had read our daughter more clearly than either of us ever managed, who had constructed a bridge that Petra reduced to ash before she even knew it spanned the water. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came through the speaker, barely more than breath. "Because your mother wanted you to earn it," I said. "Not the money, the relationship. She wanted you to choose us, not the estate." Petra's grip on the will tightened her hands, shaking, tears running down her face without stopping. "I would have had it all," she said again, the whisper smaller this time. "In 3 years, I would have had everything." This was exactly the moment Diane had anticipated 3 years back, when she added that careful postscript. The instant her daughter grasped what love had truly demanded. Not poison, not wire fraud, not a conspiracy, just 36 dinners. Just walking through the door. A child's footsteps on gravel Thursday morning pulled my attention to the window. Lena was stepping out of Conrad Farwell's black sedan, adjusting a dolphin-shaped backpack on her shoulders, and I understood, standing there watching her, that this 8-year-old was the sole person who had emerged from everything I'd dismantled to protect the estate without a mark on her. I had walked out of the Dare County Detention Center the previous day, with Petra's fractured voice still lodged somewhere behind my sternum. I would have had it all. And here was Petra's daughter on my front drive, straightening those dolphin-shaped straps, entirely unaware that federal indictments had remade the architecture of her family. Conrad came around the car in jeans and a plain sweater, no courtroom armor. He pulled a small suitcase from the trunk. I stepped to the door. Lena took the porch steps at a sprint. "Grandpa," her arms wrapped around my waist and held tight. I went down to one knee and held her back, breathing in strawberry shampoo and that faint crayon smell that clung to her. Conrad came up behind with the suitcase, his face giving nothing away. "Griffin is managing some legal obligations," he said, keeping his voice low. "Probation check-ins, scheduled court appearances. He hoped you might be able to take Lena for the weekend." Of course. He passed me the suitcase, and our eyes held for a moment. No triumph there, no regret, only the flatness of someone running on empty. "Her mother is unavailable." He let those 3 words do the work, rather than use the one word in front of the child too young to carry it. His expression, as he transferred Lena's backpack, was sealed shut. No smugness, no apology. Just exhaustion. It occurred to me then that the men who help steer things toward the right ending don't get to put the weight down when it's over. He had done what the situation required. So had I. "I'll be back Sunday evening," Conrad said. He rested a hand briefly on Lena's shoulder, then turned toward the car. We stood and watched him go, the gravel grinding under his tires as he pulled away. "Is Uncle Conrad sad?" Lena asked. I told her I thought everybody was carrying a little sadness just now. She turned this over with the seriousness of a child who takes in more than people expect. "Can we go to the dock?" "We can." The stone path took us past Diane's rose garden, stripped by November down to bare thorns. Beyond it, the Atlantic lay gray and vast. The lighthouse rose pale against a pale sky. Lena dropped down at the dock's end, feet swinging over the edge, her dolphin backpack settled beside her. I lowered myself next to her and watched our two reflections rock in the dark water. "Grandpa, are you sad?" she asked. "Daddy said you were sick, but you look okay now." The lie was right there. I could have reached for it, but Diane had always been firm on this: children know when they're being managed, and they file it away. I stayed where I was. I was sad and I was frightened, I told her, keeping it straight. "Right now, though, I'm here and you're here, and that covers it." Lena absorbed this, working it through. "Mommy told me she has to be somewhere else for a while," she said. She said it was complicated. Something cracked in my chest, the same clean fracture I'd felt the morning Diane died. The sort of break that never fully knits, but eventually teaches you to move with it. "It is complicated," I said. "But none of that falls on you to sort out. Grown-ups carry the complicated things." "Is Mommy okay?" "She's safe," I said. Accurate as far as it went. "And she loves you completely." Lena seemed to settle with that. Above us, a seagull called out and was gone. "This was Grandma's favorite place," Lena said, her voice dropping. "She'd bring me here and we'd count the boats out on the water. One time we got to 17. The image came to me whole, Diane on this same dock, Lena tucked in her lap, one arm raised toward far-off sails, spinning stories about their destinations. 3 summers back, before the diagnosis, before the will and its careful postscript about monthly dinners. Lena reached into her dolphin backpack and produced a folded square of construction paper handled carefully. "I made this for you," she said, and opened it up. White paper crayon colors, the estate house rendered in unsteady lines and generous enthusiasm, the lighthouse upright and sure, the ocean suggested in lateral strokes of blue. On the dock, 2 figures in stick figure shorthand, one tall and one small, side by side. Across the top, in letters that hadn't quite agreed on a uniform size home. Lena's hand found mine and stayed there, small and steady and sure. I thought of Petra, at the same age, offering her drawings with the same open hands, before Duke Law School, before Conrad Farwell, before the long, quiet hardening of love into calculation, and I wondered whether this was precisely what Diane had meant when she wrote about presence being something practiced. "Do you like it?" Lena asked. "I love it," I said, and was caught off guard by how completely I meant it. That drawing, the estate, the lighthouse, the 2 crayon figures at the water's edge, grandfather and granddaughter, made something plain. Whatever Petra had tried to take the real inheritance had already moved on. It lived now in a child's uncomplicated sense of where home was. The afternoon came and went, light thinning clouds tearing open now and then to let through thin November sun. Lena talked about school, about Mrs. Reynolds, and the ecosystems unit, about her friend Emma, and a hamster named Captain Fluff Bottom. I kept asking questions, kept listening, and noticed the band of tension across my chest that had been fixed in place since Petra delivered that bowl of chowder to my door, beginning slowly to give. Later, after grilled cheese and apple slices fanned into stars, I stood at the kitchen counter with Lena's drawing in my hands. The corkboard on the wall by the refrigerator had been Diane's command center: weekly lists, meal plans, dentist reminders, the family dinner schedule Petra had never once kept. I unclipped the old calendar sheet pinned there. October 2018, Diane's pen, marking Petra's birthday, dentist, 2 p.m. book club, Thursday. Then I pressed Lena's drawing into the center of that board, 2 figures in crayon beneath a yellow sun that claimed half the sky, and that word, home, uneven and absolute. It was the first time since Diane's death that I'd looked at that corkboard and found something ahead of me rather than behind. March snow dissolved off the Outer Banks beaches in thin, muddy streams. 4 months on from my daughter's arrest, Cecile Dunmore reached me by phone with the federal sentencing out of Raleigh Court, a proceeding I had deliberately stayed away from, and found me at the window I'd stood at all winter, the one where the light reached Lena's drawing, pinned to the kitchen corkboard. The construction paper had started to bow at the corners. The yellow crayon sun had faded some since November. 4 months since Conrad had brought Lena up my front steps with that dolphin-shaped backpack. 4 months of weekend visits, grilled cheese, and measured conversations about why Mommy's return was still a ways off. Cecile spoke without softening the lead. 7 years for Petra, she said. 5 for Albright. The judge pointed to aggravating factors: the poisoning, the exploitation of a position of medical trust. Parole eligibility opens at 5 years with a clean record. I kept my eyes on the Atlantic outside the living room glass. That water had looked this way in November and October and every month of the 60 years I had called this place home. Unchanged, unconcerned. And the restitution. The restitution came to a full $5 million. That money flows back to the government, given that Atlantic Coastal was their operation from the start. She'll be paying against that figure long after she walks out, decades of it. $5 million. The wire transfer she had authorized to a company that existed only on paper. Documented proof of federal fraud, a debt now stitched to her name for the rest of her life. 7 years, I said, keeping my voice even. She'll be 39 when she walks out. Lena will be 15. If Petra served the minimum 40 and 14 if she served every day of it, I know, Cecile said. 7 years. How do you make a 9-year-old understand that her mother won't be there until she's in high school? That birthdays and school plays and first crushes will all unfold inside visitation rooms, plexiglass between them, 30 minutes on the clock. What about Griffin? I asked. 6 months into probation, clean record. He's at a title insurance company in Cary, living with his sister. Sees Lena twice a week under Conrad's supervision. And Albright 5 years federal permanent medical license revocation. The state board made it official yesterday. He will never see a patient again, regardless of how much time he actually serves. Dr. Declan Albright, who had sat in my own study, examined me and declared me cognitively unfit on the basis of a daughter's fabrications and a payment I knew nothing about. 5 years felt thin for what he'd taken from me. But the permanent revocation carried its own weight. His practice was finished. Everything he'd built professionally was gone. Petra's 7-year federal sentence meant she'd be inside until she was 39, absent for the whole of Lena's childhood. From 8 to 15, the years that carve a person into who they'll become years. No visitation schedule can give back. The consequences of the conspiracy had stopped being abstract. They were measured now in the concrete currency of a little girl growing up without her mother watching. You were right to stay away, Cecile said quietly. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Being there would only have made everything worse. I had made the choice to remain here at this window with the ocean in front of me, rather than occupy a seat in a Raleigh federal courtroom and watch my daughter learn the cost of poisoning me. Some people would call that cowardice. Some would call it cruelty. I called it honesty. Sitting through that sentencing, I would have felt relief. And relief would have cost me something I wasn't prepared to give up. Thank you for calling, I said. Warren, there's one more thing. We need to finalize Lena's trust documents. Can you come to Monteo next week? Of course. 7 days later, I was at a conference table in a Monteo law office with Cecile Dunmore and Conrad Farwell. March afternoon light angled through floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out on a parking lot full of expensive cars sitting in tidy rows. Cecile laid the paperwork across the polished surface. Trust agreements, guardianship, petitions, asset schedules, investment portfolio summaries. The irrevocable trust conveys the entire Osprey Bluff estate, along with an $8 million investment portfolio, to Lena Cecile explained. Released in thirds at ages 25, 30, and 35. Conrad and I serve as co-trustees, she said, sliding a highlighted paragraph my direction. The exclusion clause is permanent, she went on. Even upon her release, Petra cannot serve as trustee, cannot reach the principal, cannot mount a legal challenge to the structure. This is irrevocable. I worked through the language, dense legal prose that reduced to a single stark fact. I was legally barring my own daughter from ever touching her daughter's inheritance. Conrad sat across from me with his own copy, reading steadily. He wore a gray suit and looked leaner than I remembered, older than his years. He picked up a pen. "You understand what you're doing, Warren," he said quietly. "You're placing legal authority over your granddaughter's entire inheritance in my hands after everything that happened between us." "I'm giving Lena what Diane wanted," I said. "Security structure and people who won't steal from her. You helped teach Petra to take. Now you're going to help teach Lena to receive. Think of it as a penance." Conrad's signature on the guardianship papers was steady and unhurried, the same deliberate handwriting that had appeared on dozens of filings over the preceding 2 months as the case against my daughter took shape. I watched the pen move and understood that certain kinds of loyalty only reveal themselves under the pressure that dismantles everything weaker. Cecile passed me another document, a family court petition naming Conrad as Lena's legal guardian during Petra's incarceration. This finalizes the transfer of parental authority. Cecile said Conrad becomes Lena's legal guardian until Petra's release. He'll carry all decisions on education, healthcare, and where she lives. Conrad Farwell, the man who had coordinated the FBI operation, built the shell company, and stood at my side through every week of this, was now designated as Lena's legal guardian and co-trustee of her entire inheritance. 34 years of friendship had been run through fire. What came out the other side was still standing. I put my name on 8 separate pages, initials in some places, full signature in others. Cecile notarized each with her embosser, the raised seal pressing into paper with a clean, satisfying click. When it was finished, Cecile gathered the signed documents into her leather portfolio. I settled back in the conference room chair and recognized that this was the last piece Diane would have wanted in place. Lena's future sealed beyond Petra's reach, wrapped in legal structures too solid to unwind. But one thing sat with me still. Diane's meticulous planning had never had to reckon with the possibility that I'd be forced to choose between my daughter's freedom and my granddaughter's safety, and that making the right call would feel indistinguishable from making the wrong one. The message came from an unlisted number on a Thursday in September. "Can we talk just once? I owe you that much. X." I stared at it for 5 solid minutes before accepting that closure sometimes comes from precisely the last person you'd have chosen to deliver it. 6 months had gone by since I'd signed those trust documents locking Petra out and placing guardianship with Conrad. Choosing right had felt like choosing wrong. I'd spent the summer learning to carry both things at once. I texted back, "Where?" "That's the Outer Banks Diner. Saturday 3 p.m., just us." Saturday came in gray. The Outer Banks Diner occupied a side street in Monteo chrome and red vinyl, unchanged since the 1970s. I found Griffin in a corner booth at 2:55, hands curled around coffee he hadn't touched. He'd dropped weight. His face read older than 36 ought to look. No wedding ring. I took the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said you owed me, I told him. "I'm here to collect." A waitress brought coffee. 3 booths down, a woman sat by herself with a paperback. 30s, dark hair, clothing that was expensive without announcing it. Audra Pelham, the woman who'd been meant to vanish to Grand Cayman with Petra, now in a Manteo diner giving Griffin room. But present. Both of them building something different on the wreckage of someone else's scheme. "I'm not here to apologize for getting caught," Griffin said quietly. "I'm apologizing for not being able to say no the first time Petra laid it out. I knew it was wrong. I went along anyway because I was scared of what she'd do if I didn't fall in line. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway because I was afraid of what Petra would think if I didn't back her up." Griffin's apology wasn't about consequences or courtrooms. It was about the moral choice he'd made, knowing the thing was wrong from the moment it was proposed, and choosing fear over integrity, which made it a deliberate betrayal rather than a manipulation. "Fear, I understand," I said. "Using fear as a license to destroy someone that I don't forgive. You're an architect, Griffin. Building things was your profession. You knew precisely what you were helping pull down." He flinched. "I know," he said. "I'll carry it the rest of my life. I just wanted you to know I'm not putting it down." The waitress came back around with the coffee. Diner noise filled the space between us, silverware, the flat hiss of the grill, low voices from other tables. "How's probation?" I asked. 18 months and nothing on my record. The title insurance work is dull but clean." He paused. "The divorce came through in August, and Lena, I see her twice a week. Conrad supervises. She asks about Petra less than she used to. That landed harder than it should have. What do you say to her when she does ask that her mom made some serious mistakes and has to answer for them, that none of it is her fault, that she is loved?" His voice gave out for just a second. "Conrad coaches me on the wording. He has a feel for it I didn't expect. I'm moving to Nashville in January," Griffin added. "Starting fresh. Audra has family there. We sat with that." "Then carry it well," I said at last. "And be a better father to Lena than you were a son-in-law to me." Griffin nodded. When we got up to leave, he put out his hand. I considered it for a long beat, then took it. Not reconciliation, not warmth, just two men who had stopped being enemies. Audra joined him at the door. They walked out together, her hand finding his. I took the coast road home, windows down, salt air threading in ahead of approaching rain. That night, October 14th, the eve of Diane's birthday, I sat at the desk in my study with good stationery and the fountain pen she'd given me for our anniversary, our 30th. The habit had been with me for years. Letters to my dead wife never sent anywhere, burned instead when they were done. I wrote, "Dear V, you would have been 73 tomorrow. Lena asked what we ought to do for your birthday. I told her we'd bake your lemon cake and take it down to the dock while we count boats. You were right about everything, V, especially the hardest part. That loving someone doesn't mean you have to let them pull you under. That drawing a line isn't the same as turning your back. That keeping Lena safe mattered more than rescuing Petra from the wreckage she was making of herself. I saw Griffin today. He apologized for lacking the spine to refuse. I accepted it without granting forgiveness. You'd have found some gracious middle road between the two. I did what I could manage. I don't know whether our daughter will ever absorb what you spent your life trying to teach her, but Lena will. I'll see to it that Lena learns that what we leave behind isn't only money and property. It's the understanding of when to hold on and when to release." Petra was 32 years old enough to remember who we were before all of this and after. Old enough to have turned differently at every fork. I haven't gone to see her. I don't know that I will. Does that make me cruel or only truthful? You always said the difference came down to intent. Happy birthday, my love. I'm still here. I'm still on my feet. And so is Lena. Yours always, W. I took the letter out to the deck. October night, sharp and clear stars spread above the dark Atlantic. I set the pages in the metal firebowl Diane had used for beach bonfires and struck a match. The paper curled and blackened at the edges, glowing faint orange before collapsing into ash. That's how grief operates, I thought, burning through everything with substance until what's left is light enough for wind and water to carry off. Warren's letter-burning ritual showed he had been working through grief and impossible choices for years by writing to Diane, never sending them, burning them instead as a kind of release. And his final acknowledgement that Diane had been right about everything showed he had taken her wisdom into himself. That shielding Lena meant holding firm with Petra, not choosing between them, but holding both hard truths at once. I watched the last curl of ash vanish into the dark over the Atlantic, then came back inside to the kitchen, where Lena's newest drawing, a crayon drawing of a family of dolphins leaping under a rainbow, was pinned beside her school calendar. I checked the date Sunday, 2 days off, marked in her unsteady handwriting with a star. Pancake breakfast with Grandpa. For the first time in 11 months, I understood that I wasn't simply enduring the aftermath. I was living in what comes next. Bare feet on hardwood at 7 on a Sunday morning in late October turned out to be the finest alarm clock I'd ever had. Better than coffee, better than sunrise, better than the silence that used to occupy this house before my granddaughter discovered that Osprey Bluff Estate was the one place she never had to earn the right to belong. What comes next, I had understood 2 days ago, standing in this kitchen, wasn't some destination still ahead of me. It was already here. Lena's drawings on the corkboard. Sunday mornings, the sound of small feet padding down the hall. This particular Sunday, I stood at the stove before dawn, making Diane's clam chowder recipe. Not pancakes chowder. Because exactly 1 year ago today, a Friday in late September 2021, my daughter Petra had arrived at this door carrying clam chowder, wrapped in a kitchen towel and a manila folder in her bag that was meant to take everything from me, and a conservatorship petition that would have shattered this family. 1 year on, I was making that same recipe for the granddaughter who had earned this house by doing the one thing Petra never learned, showing up without calculating what she'd get in exchange. Lena appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas printed with cartoon dolphins, hair matted from sleep, clutching the stuffed sea turtle I'd bought her in July. "You're making Grandma's soup," she said, pulling herself up onto the kitchen stool. "I am. Want to help?" She nodded, eager. I put a wooden spoon in her hand and let her stir while I worked through the potatoes with a knife. The chowder moved on the stove the way Diane used to make it, thick with potato and bacon, smelling like Sunday mornings, back when family meant shelter rather than calculation. Before law degrees and offshore accounts turned love into a competition where the house was the only prize. That Grandpa, Lena asked, watching the pot. Yes. What did Grandma Diane look like? I stopped, knife still over the board. Lena had been 4 when Diane's died. Those memories were thinning. "Exactly like you when you smile," I said. "She had your eyes and that way you have of tilting your head when something's got your full attention." Did she love the ocean? She loved it more than anything. Every Sunday morning we'd sit out on the deck and count boats together, same as you and I do. Lena kept the spoon moving in careful, slow circles, concentrating. "Uncle Conrad says Mommy might get out early if she does well," she said, her voice dropping a little. 4 more years instead of 6. My hand went still on the knife. "That's right," I said. "Does that worry you?" "A little. I don't really remember her that well anymore." "Is that bad?" I set the knife down and crouched beside the stool so our eyes were level. "No, sweetheart. You were 8 when she left. You're 9 now. It's all right if the picture gets soft at the edges. Will she be upset that I live here with you instead of waiting for her?" That question broke something in my chest and repaired it at the same time. Your mother made choices that carry consequences, I said carefully. Those weren't your choices to make. You are exactly where you should be. Lena seemed to settle with that and went back to her stirring. We carried bowls out to the deck an hour later. The October morning was bright and cold, the Atlantic running gray-blue under a pale sun. The Cape Hatteras lighthouse rose white at the horizon, its beam invisible in daylight, but there all the same holding its post until dark came and ships needed finding. Lena ate with full commitment, getting more chowder on her face than anywhere else. I watched her and thought about Diane's will, about the 36 dinners Petra had needed to share over 3 years to receive this estate. Simple presence. That was all Diane had required. Lena had given me 52 Sundays in the past year alone. Pancakes and boat counting and crayon drawings and questions about a grandmother she barely held in memory. She had earned this house 100 times over. Your grandmother taught me 3 things, I said, setting down my spoon. Want to hear them? Lena wiped her mouth with her wrist and nodded. First, loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you. You can love a person and still say no when they reach for what isn't theirs. Like when Mommy tried to take the house. I held back a moment, then nodded. Like that. Second, this house doesn't go to whoever wants it hardest. It goes to whoever earns it by staying, by being here, by making it home. I like being here, Lena said just that. I know you do. That's why this is your home now. Not someday when you're older. Now. She smiled at that, and I saw Diane in the way her mouth curved and in the brightness behind her eyes. Third, family isn't something you inherit. It's something you build one Sunday at a time. Lena turned this over while she scraped the last of the chowder from her bowl. We're building it right now, aren't we? She asked. We are. The afternoon ran down into twilight. We stayed on the deck watching the lighthouse beam move across darkening water, steady and constant in its rhythm. Lena's hand found mine small and warm and without reservation, and I understood then what Diane had meant all along. Not that Petra needed to earn forgiveness, but that Lena would earn belonging simply by being present, constructing the inheritance that weighs more than deeds and trust documents. The certainty that someone will always be there when you come home. Grandpa Lena said, as the first stars pricked through. Yes. Can I stay one more day? I squeezed her hand. You can stay always, Lena. This is your home. Not someday. Now. She leaned into my shoulder, content with that. We sat as darkness settled over Osprey Bluff Estate. The lighthouse swept its beam across the water in patient arcs. Behind us, the house glowed warm and lit, full of the quiet that only arrives after wars that cost everything. The estate had passed to Lena not through legal instruments or conservatorship filings or inheritance paperwork, but through the earned love and steady presence she had laid down week by week. What Diane's will had asked for, and what Petra had burned her life chasing to steal Lena, had simply lived it, proving that a home is not something you seize, but something you are given when you understand it was never a transaction. Later, I watched Lena carry her empty chowder bowl to the kitchen sink. Diane's bowl. The same Sunday custom, the same house that had nearly become a crime scene, instead of the sanctuary it remained. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know this story cost more than I ever expected to pay. I want to thank you for that, for sitting with something heavy and not looking away. Looking back, I understand now that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was learning to hold love for my daughter in one hand and the consequence she earned in the other without dropping either one. I believe God permits certain losses to protect us from worse ones. Diane understood that before I did. She built a 3-year window into her will not to punish Petra, but to give her every possible chance to choose differently. That kind of quiet, far-sighted love humbles me still. Here is what this whole ordeal taught me as plainly as I can say it. First, if someone close to you is slowly rewriting the story of who you are, Trust what you know about yourself more than what they claim to see. Second, protecting the people who depend on you is not cruelty, even when it looks that way from the outside, even when it costs you sleep. Third, patience is not the same as weakness. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait, document, and let the truth arrive on its own terms. Fourth, the real inheritance you leave. A child is not a deed or a bank balance. It is the example of how you carried yourself when everything was on the line. If this story moved you or reminded you of something you needed to hear, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need it too. Leave a thought in the comments. I read them, and they matter to me. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to Father's Silent Revenge so these stories find you when they're ready. Thank you for being here. Take good care of yourself and the people you love. Until next time.